Sharon Parker was born and raised in Florida, USA, in a family with several siblings, including 2 older brothers and an older sister. From a young age, she was very active, often attending concerts and participating in social events with her friends. Known for her stylish appearance, she always looked great. In 1976, at the age of 19, Sharon became pregnant and married her longtime boyfriend, whom she had known since school. Their relationship appeared loving and had stood the test of time. After their wedding, they moved to Alabama for her husband's job, where Sharon gave birth to a daughter named Heather. Excited about motherhood, Sharon was eager to be the best mother possible, but her husband did not share her enthusiasm. After Heather's birth, their marriage began to deteriorate. Her husband struggled with the changes, feeling jealous of the time Sharon spent caring for their baby. This ultimately led to their divorce 3 years later. Sharon returned to Florida with Heather, where her family lived. She settled in Fort Myers, close to them, and focused on raising her daughter while working. The father was largely indifferent to the child, so Sharon tried to compensate for the shortcomings in her daughter's life. Initially, Sharon found work as an assistant accountant at a local hospital. Realizing she needed support, she sought a new partner who could be a father figure for Heather and help her have more children. This hope came to fruition when her mother introduced her to Gary Parker, a builder who was studying to become an engineer. Sharon felt an instant connection, describing it as love at first sight. They quickly began a romantic relationship and married a few months later. A year after their wedding, Sharon became pregnant again and gave birth to twin boys, Jacob and Joshua. By that time, Heather was older and eagerly participated in taking care of her brothers, feeling proud to be an older sister and helping with their upbringing, especially when their mother was busy. The Parkers were a happy family. Gary is a good man. He always takes care of his wife's daughter and creates a loving environment for her. After the birth of their twins, Jacob and Joshua, their bond grew even stronger. They seemed to have the perfect family, enjoying barbecues on Sundays and camping in their backyard. It appeared as though they had a bright future ahead, filled with the joys of aging together and raising grandchildren. Unfortunately, their dreams would not come to fruition. Sharon was an excellent mother and a lively young wife who brought warmth and support to the family. As a homemaker, she managed the household while Gary worked to provide for them. They hadn't planned on having more children, but in the fall of 1989, Sharon announced that she was pregnant. They were overjoyed and eagerly anticipated the arrival of their new baby. On March 19, 1990, they welcomed a daughter named Julie. Sharon was thrilled, and Gary shared in her excitement. 10 days after Julie was born, the family planned a big celebration for their relatives and close friends. A large sign hung outside their house to announce that they had had another daughter. By this time, Jacob and Joshua were 6 years old, and Heather was already a high school student. Guests were expected to arrive on the evening of March 29, 1990. As usual, Gary and Sharon woke up that morning, took the kids to school, then Gary went to work while Sharon prepared for the party and cared for Julie. Jacob and Joshua were excited about the evening's events. Once their classes ended, they hurried home. However, as they approached the house, they found it unusually dark inside. Upon entering, they were met with an eerie silence. Their mother, Sharon, always greeted them at this time, often standing by the window to watch for them. She would help them take off their coats as part of their daily routine. So, when she didn't come out to greet them, the boys grew concerned. Initially, they thought she might be unwell and called for her, but there was no response. The boys began searching the house, and one of them soon spotted Sharon sitting motionless in a dark room. He called her name, but she remained silent. As they got closer, they touched her head, causing her to fall to the side. They saw that the right side of her head and face was covered in blood. Alarmed, they called for their baby sister, Julie, but she was nowhere to be found. Feeling distressed, the boys ran out onto the porch, uncertain about what to do next. Around the same time, 14-year-old Heather arrived home from school. She sensed that something was wrong when she saw her frightened twin brothers crying on the porch. They told her that their mother was in the house and hurt. Heather quickly went inside and was horrified to find Sharon, 33, lifeless in a chair with dried blood on her head. Frantically, Heather searched for Julie, but the baby was not there. Confused and panicked, she tried to call emergency services, but the home phone was disconnected. Leaving her brothers on the porch with instructions to stay put, she ran to a neighbor's house to call for help. Initially doubtful, the neighbor ultimately called the police. Soon after, several police cars arrived at their home and began investigating the scene. After Heather called the police, she contacted Gary. He asked for time off from work and went home. Investigators found that the locks and windows were undamaged, suggesting that either Sharon knew her attacker and let them in willingly or that the attacker had a key. Sharon was attacked from behind at close range. The scene was particularly chilling, with her sitting in a chair, her legs crossed and her hands resting on her knees, making it appear as though she was conversing with someone. This posed position suggested that the murderer may have staged it intentionally. There were no signs of a struggle. It was clear that Sharon did not anticipate being shot, as she was facing away from the attacker. An additional concern was the disappearance of her baby, Julie, who had been born just 10 days before the murder. Forensic experts searched the crime scene quickly, knowing that time was of the essence. Every minute that passed increased the urgency to issue media announcements regarding the baby's whereabouts. Unfortunately, they only had a photograph of Julie to share with the public and authorities. When Gary returned to the house, he assisted the police in identifying any missing items. Strangely, they noticed that the holiday poster on the front of the house was gone. Apart from the poster and Julie, nothing of value was taken, even Sharon's wallet was left untouched. This indicated that the murder was not a robbery. The Parker family is known for their kindness and friendliness, with no known enemies or criminal associations. They had no debts or problems, and it did not appear to be a random attack. It seemed to be motivated by personal reasons. The news of Sharon's murder deeply affected the twins, Jacob and Joshua. Until the last moment, they were hopeful that their mother was simply sick and would soon be released from the hospital. During this difficult time, the families of Sharon and Gary came together to support one another and seek justice. To gather more information, the police interviewed the closest neighbors of Sharon and Gary. A neighbor reported seeing a red pickup truck parked near Sharon's garage just before Jacob and Joshua returned home from school. She noticed that the truck was unfamiliar and appeared shabby, though she could not see the license plate. The neighbor then witnessed a woman getting out of the faded red car, carrying a grocery bag. The woman entered Sharon's house calmly, but her face was obscured by a scarf and sunglasses, making the creation of a composite sketch ineffective. This was the only lead the police had, and with no surveillance cameras in the area, it provided little assistance to the investigation. However, they managed to create a basic description of the white, dark-haired woman, which was quickly shared with the media. To gather more details, they used a poster designed for a holiday event. It was essential to talk to those close to Sharon and Gary, as the woman might have been part of a larger criminal scheme. Therefore, detectives were cautious about releasing Gary. He denied any involvement in his wife's murder, and there was no evidence to suggest he had a motive or opportunity, given that he was at work during the incident. Furthermore, Gary cooperated fully with the investigation and did not exhibit any suspicious behavior. Detectives discovered that Gary had a working relationship with a woman named Stephanie. They had taken several business trips together. Gary mentioned that just before the birth of their daughter, Stephanie seemed to become more involved with his family, behaving normally around his wife. Gary recalled that Stephanie visited their home a few days after Sharon was discharged from the hospital. On that day, their eldest daughter, Heather, expressed her dislike for Stephanie's presence, finding it suspicious. The adults dismissed Heather's concerns since she was only 14, but the police found her comment noteworthy. Is it possible that Stephanie kidnapped Julie out of jealousy? Although Gary and Stephanie worked closely together, they insisted there was no romantic involvement. Suspicion arose when a neighbor reported seeing her enter Gary's home, prompting detectives to investigate further. They interviewed Stephanie at the station. She appeared innocent and claimed she was with Gary in the office during the attack. Gary provided a detailed account of his activities on the day of Sharon's death, stating he was working until he received an urgent call from Heather. Witnesses indicated that there were no issues in Gary and Sharon's marriage. Gary described their relationship as harmonious and expressed happiness with their new baby. However, the police questioned why Gary owned the gun for self-defense. This gun was subjected to ballistic testing and did not match the murder weapon. Nevertheless, Gary remained a person of interest in the case. The interrogation lasted about 3 hours and did not raise any alarms. Experts determined that the only injury on Sharon was a gunshot wound to the head, indicating she was killed at close range. No DNA belonging to the killer was found under her fingernails. Meanwhile, a sketch of the suspect, based on a neighbor's description, was widely circulated in the media, resulting in around 100 tips to the police, most of which were deemed unreliable. However, one tip stood out. A woman named Peggy Mason came to the station, confidently claiming to know the identity of the perpetrator based on the police sketch. According to Peggy, she worked as a waitress at a restaurant with a coworker named Craig Kirk, who had a wife named Betty. She recalled that the day before the crime, on March 28, Craig happily told her that Betty was pregnant and could give birth soon. He mentioned this but couldn't provide an exact date for the birth. The day after the tragedy involving Sharon, Craig and Betty had a child together. This could have been a coincidence, but there were many odd details that made Peggy suspicious. A week before the supposed birth, Peggy had seen Betty in the restaurant and noticed that she didn't appear to be pregnant. Her belly seemed fake. By that time, her pregnancy should have exceeded 43 weeks, yet she seemed to be enjoying herself without going to the hospital to induce labor, which seemed strange. When Peggy mentioned these concerns to Craig, he shrugged them off, citing rare cases where pregnancies can behave unusually. However, Peggy felt he was not being truthful. Right after Sharon's murder, Craig and Betty celebrated the birth of their baby, and Peggy, having been invited, attended the party. She was surprised at how quickly Betty and the newborn were discharged from the hospital and returned to normal life. Betty seemed at ease, almost as if she hadn't just given birth. As a mother of 3 herself, Peggy doubted that the child had been born just a day earlier. However, it was hard to confirm her suspicions since Betty kept the baby at a distance from the guests, refusing to show her and attributing her behavior to postpartum depression and medication. Towards the end of the party, Peggy managed to get close enough to the baby to inspect her more closely. She noticed that the baby had short hair, as if it had already been shaved, and the baby did not resemble either of its parents, Betty or Craig. When Peggy shared her suspicions with Betty, the woman became angry and quickly sent all the guests away, particularly upset with Peggy. She questioned where a newborn could come from. After seeing the sketch in the media and hearing about what happened to Sharon, Peggy began to connect the dots and suspected that Betty or Craig might be involved in the case. The detectives became interested in this new lead and decided to investigate Betty. She was previously unknown to the police, having been born in Florida on November 7, 1950. In her first marriage, she had 2 children, but her husband was very abusive. Betty escaped his control, filed for divorce, and gained sole custody of her kids. Unfortunately, she faced many challenges. In 1981, she lost custody of her sons due to her difficult financial situation, and the authorities placed them in foster care. Craig met Betty in 1982, and the year later, they began dating and eventually got married. However, despite their efforts, they remained in poverty and struggled to find happiness. Relatives and friends described their lives as a constant battle for survival. Craig worked long hours in a restaurant, and Betty attempted to find work, but she had dropped out of school due to an early pregnancy, which made it hard for her to secure a good job. They lacked stability and prosperity, but both tried hard to improve their situation. Betty desperately wanted to become a mother. She loved Craig and hoped they could have a child together, but despite trying for many years and even seeking medical help, they were unsuccessful. To fulfill her longing for motherhood, Betty worked in various child-related jobs, such as being a Girl Scout leader and performing as a clown at children's events. During this time, she had a minor legal issue when she forged a check, but she quickly resolved it by paying restitution, which meant there was no official record of the offense. For some time, it seemed that Betty and Craig had accepted that they might never become parents. However, Betty was increasingly anxious about possibly losing Craig to a younger woman who could have children. At the end of the year, she surprised her husband and friends with the exciting news that she was finally pregnant. Betty appeared to be pregnant as her belly was growing. On the evening of March 29th, she returned home with a girl she named Laura. This seemed unusual because she had been discharged from the hospital right after giving birth. Now their family had grown to 3, and they shared their happy news with loved ones. Detectives went to the restaurant where Craig worked, but he was off that day. They found his home address and went to check if he was there. When Craig opened the door, he was visibly intoxicated and struggled to stay upright. He was confused about why the detectives had come to his home. The house was chaotic and unsanitary. The only clear thing Craig could communicate was that they had recently had a baby. He claimed he was celebrating this event, which was why he was drunk. Betty and baby Laura were also present. Betty confirmed that she had just become a mother and had returned from the medical center a few days prior. She stated that the baby was born in a hospital and that they were discharged immediately due to no complications. However, when questioned, she had difficulty remembering the name and address of the hospital. She eventually said it was a hospital on Michigan Avenue, but the detectives' investigation revealed that there was no maternity ward there. Additionally, she could not present a birth certificate, claiming it was lost in the mess around them. When investigators examined the baby, they noticed that the child did not resemble either Craig or Betty. Despite these inconsistencies, the detectives decided against detaining Craig and Betty, as they wished to handle the situation delicately to avoid escalating tensions. Meanwhile, an unmarked car, driven by a woman possibly connected to the situation, left the house while the police were merely observing the family. Shortly after the police left, Betty began causing trouble by carrying and packing items from the house and loading large boxes into her car. Investigators identified a faded red pickup truck that matched the description provided by a neighbor. Betty then got into the car and drove off, with detectives following her at a distance. They eventually decided to pull her over and inspect the vehicle. Inside, they found numerous boxes but no sign of the child. The detectives returned to Betty's home, where they discovered that the baby was with Craig. They considered this a danger to the child's safety and called in Child Protective Services to have the child taken away. Fortunately, the child was unharmed and was quickly taken to the hospital, where an examination confirmed her well-being. Meanwhile, Craig was brought in for questioning. He was surprised by the situation, expressing disbelief about the events. He claimed to have no knowledge of Sharon's case and believed that Betty couldn't be pregnant by him since their relationship had deteriorated and they hadn't been intimate for years. Craig thought his wife might have had an affair but had accepted the idea of her pregnancy and the baby. However, the investigation revealed a more troubling scenario. Craig possessed a pistol that was taken for analysis because the authorities suspected it might be the weapon used to kill Sharon. Despite this, ballistic tests did not confirm its involvement. Craig provided a crucial lead, mentioning that Betty owned a similar pistol of the same caliber, which was never found, suggesting it had been disposed of by her. After hours of questioning, Craig seemed to genuinely believe that his wife was pregnant with another man's child and showed little interest in knowing more. Medical tests later confirmed that the child was Julie, the kidnapped daughter of Sharon and Gary. During her interrogation, Betty was asked if she recognized Sharon Parker. She replied that she had seen Sharon on television and then confessed to killing Sharon. Betty met Sharon and her twins, Jacob and Joshua, while enjoying a day at the mall. They struck up a conversation, and during their chat, Betty revealed that she had recently experienced a miscarriage, a shared concern that connected her to Sharon. Betty mentioned that she was pregnant again and was seeking support. The police confirmed that Betty had indeed become pregnant in early 1989 but had suffered a miscarriage shortly after, which was likely devastating for her. Her marriage was struggling, and she was desperately trying to keep her husband, motivated by a strong desire for a child. Feeling a bond, they exchanged phone numbers before parting ways. Later, Betty learned that Sharon had given birth to a baby girl. At that time, newspapers published the names of newborns, including the parents' contact information, making it easy for friends and family to send congratulations. This information helped Betty locate the Parkers' residence. She claimed she simply wanted to visit Sharon and congratulate her on the arrival of her new baby. When Betty arrived, Sharon recognized her and expressed joy. She handed Betty some money to buy groceries, which is why a neighbor saw Betty carrying a grocery bag near Sharon's house. However, when Betty entered the home and handed Sharon the groceries, the gun she carried for self-defense accidentally discharged, killing Sharon instantly. Betty stated she was in shock and initially considered fleeing but couldn't abandon the baby out of concern for the child's safety. She decided to take the baby with her, genuinely believing it was an accident and insisting that she should be released from custody. Naturally, Betty was arrested. Her account did not align with the crime scene or the reconstructed events. Soon after, she ceased cooperating with investigators and requested a lawyer. During a search of her home, authorities discovered numerous newspaper clippings featuring the names of newborns, specifically girls, indicating her troubling obsession with female infants. The investigation revealed that Betty had met some of these families, frequently introducing herself to medical professionals. However, her odd behavior raised suspicions, leading some to confront her and ultimately ask her to leave. Notably, prior to Sharon's case, she had not brought a firearm, which proved critical to the tragic outcome. In 1991, Betty's trial commenced. The prosecution charged her with first-degree murder and kidnapping. Betty maintained that the shooting was an accident and declared her innocence. She attempted to portray her actions regarding the child in a positive light within her narrative, but no one believed her. After just 30 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Betty Kirk guilty and sentenced her to life in prison, though she would be eligible for parole at the age of 103. It is unlikely she will ever be free again. The baby, Julie, was returned to her father, Gary Parker, and grew up in a loving home surrounded by her siblings. Gary committed himself to raising his children well, providing them with education and parental love. Born on May 20, 1998, in Louisville, Colorado, Ashley Doolittle discovered her love for horses at the age of 5. Growing up in a supportive family and following her dreams, she always aspired to be a role model in her community, like many other young girls. Ashley was raised by her parents, Anne Marie and Jeff Doolittle, along with her 2 brothers, Brandon and Michael. From an early age, her vibrant personality attracted people to her. By the time she was 5, she had her first pony, igniting a lifelong passion for horseback riding that became a key part of her identity. Her love for horses and the sense of community she found in this world gave her purpose. A few years later, at the age of 8, she began attending horse shows and immediately fell in love with the community atmosphere and rodeo lifestyle. She actively participated in rodeo events and achieved many accomplishments. In 2016, at around 18 years old, she was honored with the title of Lady-in-Waiting, a respected position in the rodeo community. This role involved assisting the rodeo queen and entailed various responsibilities, such as organizing fundraisers, supporting sponsors, attending community events, and representing the event as a spokesperson. Receiving this title was a great honor for Ashley, bringing her one step closer to her ultimate goal of becoming rodeo queen. Ashley became well known for her dedication to the rodeo community, and many teenage girls looked up to her as a role model. Young girls often asked Ashley for her autograph, and she always wrote personal letters to each one, encouraging them to pursue their dreams. In addition, she was actively involved in the Boulder County 4-H horse program, inspiring young children to participate in horseback riding. Ashley competed on various horse judging teams, participated in horse shows, and earned the title of Champion High Individual at the National 4-H Western Roundup. But Ashley had even bigger ambitions. She is a founding member and has served as vice president for 2 terms of the Thomas Valley FFA, the Future Farmers of America. FFA is an organization that supports individuals intending to enter and lead in the agricultural field. During her time there, she has been involved in many activities and plans to pursue FFA at the state level when she begins college. She graduated from Berthoud High in May 2016 and intended to attend Colorado State University, majoring in agricultural business. She looked forward to the next chapter of her life, unaware that it would be disrupted in a tragic way. Her life was devastated by one person, Tanner Flores, who believed that if he couldn't be with her, no one else should ever. Ashley met Tanner in high school, and their relationship seemed like a typical teenage romance to outsiders. However, they faced challenges. Tanner was controlling and dictated what she could and could not do. He even forbade her from attending college parties, which seemed absurd since Ashley was not the type to party. Was Tanner simply jealous of Ashley's accomplishments? Did he want to possess her completely? Was he insecure about losing her to someone better? Regardless of his motivations, Tanner frequently expressed his personal insecurities through his treatment of Ashley. After a year of dating, she realized he was not the right person for her and decided to break up with him. However, this decision was not easy for Tanner to accept. On June 4, 2016, he suggested they go hiking in Estes Park to discuss their relationship. Although Ashley tried to communicate that they were no longer together, Tanner mistakenly thought the conversation had gone well and believed they had reconciled. The next day, Ashley went out with friends to the Sundance Steakhouse, where Tanner unexpectedly showed up. Witnesses reported that he grabbed her, tried to turn her to face him, and attempted to talk, but she was done with his behavior and left. The next day, he convinced her to meet at Lon Hagler Reservoir to talk again. Despite her clearly stating that they were not back together, he somehow believed they had resumed their relationship. The day after that, Ashley returned to the Sundance Steakhouse and even reached out to Tanner, asking him not to come because she didn't want to see him. Tanner, however, made up a story saying he was locked out of his truck and needed her help. Ashley ignored his message. For days after their hike, on June 8, Ashley reluctantly agreed to accompany Tanner to sell some scrap metal, unaware that this decision would lead to a horrific incident in her life. On that day, Tanner checked Ashley's phone and found out that she had been texting two other guys, Tori and Jared. He suspected Ashley of flirting with them and accused her of being unfaithful, even though they were not officially in a relationship at the time. Later that night, he reached out to the two guys, which made Ashley very angry. He then sent her a text in which he expressed his hope that she realized what she had lost, stating that he had done everything for her and spent so much money. He warned her that he was going to do something reckless and then ended the message with a bye. Ashley tries to protect herself and still wants to maintain her friendship with Tanner, even though things have become tense. The next day, he messaged her again, asking if they could meet up and talk. She told him she was in Denver that morning but could meet later. While Ashley was in Denver, Tanner borrowed his dad's gun and went to shoot at Carter Lake, claiming it helped him relax. He continued to text Ashley throughout the day and even mentioned that he missed her. Frustrated, Ashley texted him to stop but still planned to meet him later because she didn't want to be rude. On the afternoon of June 9th, they met at Lon Hagler Reservoir, where Ashley got into Tanner's truck, unaware it would be the last thing she ever did. Around 7:30 p.m., her parents started looking for her since she hadn't come home. At 8 p.m., they found her car in a parking space at the reservoir. Both of her parents, Jeff and Ann, are confident that she will text them if she plans to come home late. Given this, they concluded that something wasn't right and immediately called the sheriff's office to report her missing. Local authorities quickly got involved and began their search. They contacted Ashley's friends and family for information. During this process, a name that came up repeatedly was Tanner. Authorities discovered that Tanner and Ashley had been in a relationship but had since broken up. They learned that Tanner was very upset about the breakup. One person mentioned that he posted a Snapchat message that raised concerns about his mental health, leading to fears that he might be thinking about ending his life. Many others interviewed by the authorities also noted that they had never seen Tanner this upset. Shortly thereafter, Tanner's father arrived and informed the officers that his .22 pistol was missing from the gun safe. He also stated that Tanner knew where the keys were located. Authorities issued a lookout alert for Tanner's truck and notified law enforcement across Colorado. The search was intensified, and by 8 a.m. the next day, they had located his position. Authorities received information that the truck had been seen at Tanner's grandfather's property in CB Bar, Colorado, which was about 5 hours away. Tanner's grandmother had called a neighbor to confirm the truck's presence, and upon verification, she reported it to the police. Due to the distance, organizing a team for an arrest would take some time, so authorities decided to send a wildlife ranger to the property to monitor Tanner and prevent his escape. Although Tanner did not attempt to flee, he engaged in disturbing behavior. The neighbor and the wildlife ranger witnessed him throwing blood-soaked rags into a nearby field and moving a roll-up mat behind the house. What happened next was horrifying. Tanner emerged from the house with a heavy blanket and placed it in the back seat of his truck. It was visibly heavy for him to carry, and a human arm was protruding from it. At this point, it was evident what Tanner had done. Fortunately, later that morning, he was arrested without incident by the sheriff's deputies, a CBI agent, and members of 3 other law enforcement agencies. When they opened the blanket in Tanner's truck, they discovered the body of Ashley. There was no way to save her, and her worst nightmare had come true. Tanner initially told the officers that he and Ashley were discussing their relationship in his truck when she lost control. He claimed that she had the gun, and while he was struggling to get it from her, it went off and accidentally killed her. He then stated that he shot her twice afterward to alleviate her suffering because the first shot did not kill her. After hearing this account, an officer expressed skepticism, and eventually, Tanner confessed the truth. Since Ashley had passed away by that time, Tanner was the only source for the details of the incident. He informed the officer that he and Ashley had met at Lon Hagler Reservoir, and then they drove west toward Carter Lake. This was the same lake Tanner had visited earlier that day to practice shooting. He mentioned that they talked about their relationship during their drive. Ashley expressed that she did not want to reconcile with him at that moment but saw the possibility of marrying him in the future. She needed time to explore other relationships. After this conversation, they began driving back to where Ashley's car was parked, but things took a dark turn. Tanner described how Ashley glared at him during the ride, which led him to reach into the back seat, grab the revolver, and attack her in the back of the head twice. He claimed that she did not die immediately, which is why he shot her a 3rd time, stating that it was meant to end her suffering. After that, he tried to clean her body as best as he could and drove to the land of his deceased grandfather in another part of the state. Once he provided his statement, he was taken to the Mesa County Jail without the option of bail. Ashley's funeral was held on June 17 at St. John Evangelist Catholic Parish in Loveland, Colorado. The ceremony was attended by over 700 people, including family, friends, and community members, all devastated by the tragic loss. The teenage girl, once a symbol of hope, happiness, and aspiration in the community, has now departed, leaving behind a profound sense of sorrow for everyone. And Ashley's mother expressed her wish for her daughter to be remembered for her vibrant life rather than for the way she passed away. She wanted Ashley's legacy to reflect the achievements of an energetic 18-year-old girl who had so much promise ahead of her. 18. Many people often feel confused about determining their life direction, such as their passions, careers, or college choices, because there are so many options. However, this was not the case for Ashley. In fact, she excelled in almost every field she participated in. That was her identity. While many young people struggle to figure out their paths at this age, Ashley had a clear vision for her future. Tragically, no one anticipated that her plans would be interrupted. People who attended her funeral described her as being fun, cheerful, and approachable. She was poised to become the rodeo queen the following year, but instead, she will be remembered during the upcoming season. Ashley had made significant contributions to her community, making her funeral a large and meaningful event. On that day, in addition to the ceremony, the FBI announced it would be joining Larimer County in the investigation to assist with evidence collection and search efforts. Tanner, who had previously been in Mesa County Jail, was moved to Larimer County Jail on the same day Ashley was laid to rest. The Ashley family was now beginning its pursuit of justice. On June 20th, Tanner appeared in court for the first time, facing charges of first-degree murder and second-degree kidnapping. The kidnapping charge stemmed from the allegation that Tanner would not allow Ashley to exit the truck when she attempted to do so. Following Ashley's funeral, her family would endure ongoing grief and suffering, yet they would have to wait a year and a half for legal proceedings to begin. In October 2017, the trial began, with both Tanner and Ashley's family and friends in attendance. It was evident to everyone that Tanner had killed Ashley. The central question was whether the act was premeditated. The prosecution argued that the murder was planned, claiming that Tanner had gone to the lake earlier that morning to test the revolver and find a secluded spot for the crime. The prosecution also noted that the revolver used in the murder was a single-action firearm, requiring manual resetting after each shot. Given that Ashley was shot 3 times, they argued this demonstrated deliberate intent rather than a spontaneous act. The defense, on the other hand, contended that it was not a planned murder and suggested that second-degree murder would be a more appropriate charge. During the trial, Tanner took the stand and described the incident in detail. He admitted to what he had done but denied any intention to kill Ashley. New information emerged during his testimony that had not been included in his initial statement after his arrest. He revealed that he had disposed of both their phones after the murder, but not before texting himself from Ashley's phone, claiming they were not together that afternoon and that she would not meet him. This seemed like a failed attempt to cover his tracks. One shocking revelation came when he disclosed that the night before his arrest, he had broken into his deceased grandfather's home. Once inside, he cleaned up some blood, turned on the TV, and watched cartoons before going to sleep. This bizarre behavior raised a question: how can someone claim to love another person so deeply yet have the capacity to murder them and then watch television afterwards? This remains an unfathomable mystery. At the conclusion of the trial, both families were left devastated by their loss, mourning their children and the futures they had envisioned. While the verdict brought some measure of justice for Ashley, it also marked a grim end for Tanner. The anguish felt by both families was unbearable. Though justice was served, no true winners emerged from this heartbreaking situation. Both families were irreparably damaged in the process. The case highlighted a significant issue: dating violence in the United States. Each year, approximately 1.5 million high school students experience physical violence from an intimate partner, and 1 in 3 teens aged 14 to 20 in the United States experiences dating violence. Alarmingly, 81% of parents do not consider teen dating violence to be a serious problem. And Jeff Doolittle found that there was insufficient discussion about this reality, which sadly affected their daughter, as well as many other young people in the United States and beyond who face similar situations. In response, they established the Ashley Doolittle Foundation. This nonprofit aims to honor their daughter's legacy by giving back to the community as she once did. The foundation focuses on raising awareness and preventing teen dating violence, helping victims connect with appropriate support groups, launching school programs, and educating students and parents about the signs of dating violence. Ashley's mother emphasized that the foundation was created to keep Ashley's memory alive. She stated that they wanted something good to come from this through the Ashley Doolittle Foundation and that they wanted to prevent other families from experiencing what they went through. The story of Ashley serves as a serious reminder of the dangers that can exist in teenage relationships. While not every relationship mirrors the tragic events involving Tanner and Ashley, some do. It is crucial to recognize that violence, whether physical, verbal, or psychological, is unacceptable. Ignoring these issues can lead to severe consequences, as Ashley tragically experienced. Tanner Flores, the perpetrator, was found guilty of murder and second-degree kidnapping on October 4, 2017. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, along with an additional 32 years. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Kathleen Shepard. Kathleen Shepard and her friend Detsy Hughes grew up across the street from each other in the small town of Dayton, Iowa, which has a population of less than 1,000 people. In this quiet town, everyone knows one another. Kathleen was 3 years older than Detsy. In 2013, she was 15, while Detsy was 12. Despite the age difference, they were best friends and did everything together, often walking home from the school bus stop. At approximately 4 p.m. on May 20, 2013, after being dropped off by the bus, they noticed that a red pickup truck was following them. The man in the truck caught their attention by offering them a chance to earn some pocket money. He said he owned a lawn care business and needed help. Although he was a little skeptical about their lawn mowing abilities, he was so convincing that they began to trust him. The man said he could drive them home to get ready, then they would go to work together, and he would pay them right away. However, when they got in the car, he changed his plans. Instead of taking them home, he drove them out of town. When Kathleen and Detsy sensed something was wrong and tried to resist, the man pulled out a weapon and threatened to kill them if they didn't comply. He took them to an old, abandoned house and brought them to a dilapidated barn that hadn't been used for years. He tied them up, threw them face down in the dirt, and warned them that if they obeyed him, they wouldn't be harmed and he would eventually let them go, even offering to give them a ride back to town. At that moment, Detsy realized something was very wrong. First, if he's not planning to kill them, why go so far from the city? Second, the presence of a weapon suggested otherwise from the beginning. Kathleen's last words were, "They don't deserve this." After that, the kidnapper took her into the woods, giving Detsy a chance to escape. Detsy couldn't explain why Kathleen was taken or what happened to Kathleen since she didn't witness it. Although the kidnapper threatened them with a weapon, he was so careless that he left it right in front of Detsy while taking Kathleen away. Detsy was able to loosen her ropes and escape. While fleeing, she grabbed a weapon for protection in case he tried to catch her. Scared, she navigated through the forest, avoiding thorny roots, and then followed a dirt road in search of help. There were no people around. Despite her injuries, Detsy did not give in to the pain. She felt as though the kidnapper was still pursuing her and that escape was impossible. In her desperate situation, she called out for help, and people nearby brought her to the police. Detsy was terrified. During her escape, she had lost her shoes and sustained several cuts on her legs and feet, which were bloody but not life-threatening. While her physical injuries healed quickly, the emotional scars lingered. Although she received rehabilitation, she still struggles with the psychological effects from the traumatic experience. Detsy provided a detailed description of the kidnapper and his car, giving detectives a solid chance of locating him before he could harm anyone else. Later that evening, around 8 p.m., a body was discovered in the countryside, near the area where Detsy was rescued, at a country estate northeast of Dayton, Iowa. The deceased was identified as 42-year-old Michael Klunder, who Detsy later recognized as her kidnapper. Interestingly, the cause of his death was not revealed for some time. The situation was confusing because Michael did not leave any suicide notes, and there were no clues about where to search for Kathleen. The police had to conduct the search for her without clear leads. Detectives investigated Michael's background for possible clues and found some information. He had his first trial in 1989 when he was just 17 years old and was from Mason City, Iowa, USA. On February 22, 1989, Michael knocked on Jill Gilsey's door, claiming that his car had broken down and asking to use her phone. Instead of just helping him, Jill offered to give him a ride home so he could deal with his car issues. He accepted her offer immediately without any hesitation. As soon as Jill opened the door, he attacked her, knocking her down, hitting her several times, and trying to strangle her with his bare hands. Despite the brutal attack and severe bruising on her neck, Jill fought back and, with the last of her strength, pushed him away. She was determined to seek justice for this horrific incident. Michael faced charges for second-degree burglary and assault with intent to cause serious injury, both of which were aggravated offenses. However, after his arrest, a judge decided to set a bail amount that was below the maximum for those charges, allowing him the potential to be released. This leniency angered Jill and others, as it seemed the judge underestimated the severity of his actions. Fortunately, Michael could not afford the bail, so he remained in custody. Michael remains in custody, awaiting his sentencing hearing. Jill and many others who know Michael believe he is not receiving the punishment he deserves, which worries them. During the preliminary hearing, a decision was made regarding whether Michael, the 17-year-old, should be tried as an adult or as a juvenile. The juvenile judge chose to recuse himself because Michael Klunder displayed alarming behavior from the start. He had a history of being problematic and aggressive, particularly toward girls. In November of that year, Michael enticed a classmate into the school restroom. He threatened her with a weapon and demanded that she take off her shirt, but the girl resisted and tried to escape from him. In response, he struck her on the head with a metal object and physically assaulted her. This resulted in serious injuries, and the girl spent about a week recovering in the hospital. By February 1989, it was reported that Michael had been released after fulfilling all court orders following the incident with the girl in the restroom. Michael returned to live with his father and stepmother in Mason City. However, he soon began to have aggressive outbursts. Shortly after, he attacked a girl named Jill and was arrested. While in custody, officials advised against allowing him to interact with older inmates due to concerns that he might either act aggressively or be bullied because of the charges against him. However, his skills as a liar and manipulator posed a risk of negatively influencing other young offenders. Facing serious charges, he could be sentenced to up to 12 years in prison and fined up to $15,000. If he had been tried as a minor, he would have faced a maximum of 7 years. This situation provided his lawyer with both a clear goal and leverage. On March 30th, Michael pleaded guilty to attempted burglary and attempted assault with intent to cause serious harm. Just 5 weeks before his 18th birthday, he learned his sentence. Michael was taken to the mental health center in Cherokee for a psychiatric evaluation. While imprisoned, he was sentenced to 5 years for attacking Jill. He spent his 18th birthday in prison and received an additional 2 years for robbery. However, these sentences were to run concurrently, meaning he would still be released after 5 years. This news troubled Jill, but there was nothing she could do about it. The court had decided that extending his sentence would be inhumane, likely hoping he could be rehabilitated despite being a potentially dangerous criminal. Despite the short sentence, Michael's lawyers sought to have it reduced. Their main argument was that he was still a minor, even though he was tried as an adult. Fortunately, in September 1989, the court refused to modify its ruling. 2 years passed, and he completed his sentence for robbery, but he still had 3 years remaining for the charges of bodily harm and assault before his official release. Michael adhered to all court orders and took part in a rehabilitation program for individuals at risk of committing abuse. He took the program seriously and attended all the lectures, but it seemed unlikely that he genuinely wanted to change his behavior. His lawyer approached the case with determination, believing that Michael was ready for release. Michael had a flawless prison record, with no incidents or fights during his incarceration, which worked in his favor. Michael's defenders succeeded in getting his case reviewed, resulting in his release in 1991, shortly after his 20th birthday. However, he was placed on probation. From the start, it became clear that his old habits were resurfacing. In 1992, 2 young girls, both just 3 years old, disappeared near Michael's home while playing in a sandbox. Their parents quickly realized the girls had been abducted and reported it to the police, prompting an immediate search, fearing the worst. An unknown caller contacted the police station, reporting that the 2 missing girls had been found at a bus stop nearly 100 kilometers from their hometown. A passerby noticed a small orange container under a canopy at the bus stop. Upon opening it, he was startled by what he discovered and promptly alerted the authorities. When officers arrived, they found the girls, who were both injured. Though several witnesses had identified Michael as a suspect, he had not yet been charged. One witness recalled seeing him observe young girls from his window, spending extended periods in his kitchen or living room watching as children played outside or as schoolgirls returned home. In light of the girls' abduction, this behavior raised alarm. The day after the girls were located, police visited Michael's home to question him. However, at that time, detectives lacked sufficient evidence. They faced a challenge in gathering information about the kidnappers from the 3-year-old victims without causing further trauma. Due to their young age and fear, the girls were unable to provide meaningful details. After an initial conversation, detectives still had no valuable information. Michael denied any involvement in the kidnapping, and without evidence, the police had no basis to detain him. Michael took advantage of the delay, got into his 1982 Honda, and left the state, heading to Florida. However, his getaway was cut short when the car broke down on the road. This forced him to seek help from a relative who lived nearby. Eventually, Michael was arrested on Christmas Eve. The arrest occurred at a bus stop in Houston, thanks to an anonymous tip received by law enforcement. It turned out that the call had come from Michael's relative, who suspected that he was up to something, even though they had no knowledge of the situation involving the kidnapped girls. The 3-year-old victims lived in the same residential complex in Cherokee, where the troubling events had taken place. Despite appearing to be a safe place under surveillance, it seems he had been watching the girls for a while before realizing they were alone. CCTV footage from the complex showed the girls playing before they suddenly looked away and moved in another direction. Detectives believe Michael managed to attract their attention while remaining out of sight of the cameras. This plan worked. The girls' miraculous rescue was even covered on television. Michael had hidden them in a container, which he sealed and left at the bus stop. If the box hadn't been discovered within a few hours, the outcome could have been very different. It was a fortunate coincidence, along with the vigilance of a passerby, that led to their rescue. Doctors reported that while the children had not been abused, they did have injuries. One showed visible signs of strangulation around her neck. The other girl could have suffered the same fate, but for unknown reasons, the criminal seemed less focused on her. In a frightened, fragmented manner, the girl described how a large man had grabbed her neck, making it hard for her to breathe. Fortunately, something caused him to stop. This miraculous rescue also helped police gather crucial information. Initially, the girls were too scared to talk freely to detectives, but over time, they revealed that the criminal had attempted to strangle both of them when he took them away to a remote location. Witnesses had a clear memory of the attacker and provided a description that closely resembled Michael Klunder. Following this, he was arrested and charged with kidnapping and harming children. In Iowa, kidnapping can result in a life sentence, and his previous criminal history raised concerns. Michael was genuinely shocked when detectives returned to his home to read him his rights. During the hearing, his lawyer argued for a lighter sentence. Michael was convicted of third-degree kidnapping, but the assault charge was reduced since no one died in the incident and the choking was considered less severe. He received a 2-year sentence for causing bodily harm and a 10-year sentence for each count of third-degree kidnapping. The jury reached their verdict quickly. By the time he was incarcerated, another crime had been solved just 5 months later, revealing that he had also been involved in other kidnapping incidents that he had not disclosed. Fortunately, those incidents did not lead to any fatalities. Ultimately, the court sentenced him to over 30 years in prison, to be served consecutively, with no possibility of parole. His lawyer continued to argue that instead of prison, Michael needed rehabilitation and support for reintegration into society. There was some merit to this argument, as Michael's behavior during his first arrest was concerning. He appeared detached and indifferent when speaking with police. After Michael confessed, he was asked why he felt it was necessary to kidnap his victims. He couldn't provide a solid explanation and later claimed it was due to having a bad day. It's unclear what behaviors might lead to leniency in prison, but Michael was released in 2011 after serving only 20 years. However, this was followed by another probation period, which he failed to complete. Before he could fully adjust to being free, he began to act out again, leading to a more tragic outcome. This time, Michael kidnapped Kathleen and Detsy. Detsy was rescued by accident, but the search for Kathleen continues. This incident increased the total number of confirmed victims of Michael to 7, most of whom were minors. However, the actual number could be greater. In 1992, Michael lived in another state where he committed additional crimes, including the kidnapping of an 18-year-old girl named Lori Lee Smith, whom he lured with his car. At the time, Lori was driving home on a quiet country road late at night. Suddenly, she noticed someone behind her flashing their headlights and signaling her to stop. Believing it was an emergency, Lori pulled over and rolled down her window. Michael then approached her vehicle, claiming that her taillights were out and offering to help check them. Unaware of the danger, Lori got out of her car. As soon as Lori reached the side of the trunk, Michael pulled out a knife and threatened her. He tried to lure her into his car, but Lori was brave and fiercely resisted him. They struggled inside Michael's vehicle until a passing truck interrupted them. It's important to note that Michael typically kept his victims alive until the last moment, with the exception of Kathleen. After Michael was released in 2011 and before he kidnapped Kathleen and Detsy in 2013, there was a significant period during which his actions went unaccounted for. This gap raised concerns and warranted further investigation to determine if there were other victims or crimes that had not yet been discovered. During this time, Michael had plenty of opportunities to commit more crimes, and there were few signs that he intended to change his ways. It was believed that he could have committed many similar offenses, some of which might have resulted in deaths. His victims were often saved by sheer luck or unexpected circumstances. There could be other unresolved kidnappings and murders linked to him. For example, he was suspected of being involved in the disappearances of two 8-year-old girls in 2012, Leary Cook Morrissey and Elizabeth Collins from Evansdale, Iowa. However, proving a connection to these cases was not possible. At the time of Leary and Elizabeth's observation, Michael's phone was detected in a different location, which cleared him of suspicion. This case remains unsolved, and the fate of 15-year-old Kathleen is still uncertain. Detectives are analyzing the information and investigating the final days of Michael's life. Interestingly, he appeared to be maintaining a normal life. He had a steady job, purchased a house, and was married to a woman named Lisa, who also came from a small town. Michael preferred small towns because children there tend to be more trusting, many homes are often left unlocked, and it can be easier for criminals to operate. Michael was fortunate not only in finding victims but also in eluding detection. Even though he should have been registered as an abuse offender and was under constant watch by the authorities, Lisa was completely unaware of his past. As a result, detectives decided to search their home first. On February 25, 2013, law enforcement officers spoke with neighbors to see if anyone had seen Kathleen, but no one recognized her photo. Lisa, who listened in shock to the revelations from the police about her husband, felt overwhelmed and was unable to provide any useful information to the investigators. Around this time, 12-year-old Detsy had regained her composure. She spoke with the detectives and later participated in several interviews, which helped them piece together the details of her escape. Detectives searched the barn but did not find Kathleen there. Hopes for her safe return quickly faded when bloodstains found in Michael's car were matched to her DNA. The circumstances surrounding Kathleen remained unclear, but they were able to make some predictions about Michael's behavior. When he returned and discovered that Detsy had escaped and taken his weapon with her, he concluded that it was all over for him and took his own life. Michael likely feared returning to prison, knowing that other inmates would have treated him terribly for his crimes against children. Something terrible must have happened to Kathleen, leading him to choose death over life in prison. Even after Detsy's escape, there were still no updates about Kathleen. The search continued, and in those initial days, they discovered the girls' backpacks, which Michael had left behind in the forest. Kathleen Shepard's fate was discovered 2 weeks later when a body was found in the river, a few kilometers from her hometown. Unfortunately, her body's condition had deteriorated, making identification difficult. Eventually, it was confirmed that the body belonged to Kathleen Shepard. Investigators found signs of sharp objects on her body and the same bindings used to restrain Detsy. In this way, Kathleen became Michael's last victim. This situation raises questions regarding Michael as an individual. In light of these events, the public expressed outrage towards law enforcement, accusing them of protecting dangerous criminals more than the victims. Interestingly, Lisa, Michael's wife, was one of the few who genuinely mourned him. Could she have been the only person to see some humanity in him that could inspire affection? Or was her seeming affection a result of her husband's manipulative behavior? Let's look at the events that took place in Kershaw, South Carolina, on December 26, 2011. A 30-year-old woman named Hope Melton called her grandmother to express her fear that someone was following her while she was driving on a rural road. Unfortunately, the call was cut off before Hope could provide more details. To investigate the case, the police reviewed CCTV footage, which helped them identify the suspect. Hope Melton, whose full name was Beverly Hope Roscoe Melton, was born on December 4, 1981, in Cheraw, South Carolina. She was the daughter of William Roger and Elizabeth Ray Hodge Roscoe. Hope graduated with honors from Chesterfield High School in 2000, where she participated in various organizations, including the Beta Club, the Vocational Honor Society, the Health Occupations Class, and the Chorus. At the time of her death, she was managing T&T Country Store in McBee, South Carolina, and actively attended Lancaster Church of God, where she taught children's church. Hope had been happily married to Gary Lee Melton for just over a year, and they were excited about starting a family. Unfortunately, Christmas 2011 was the last holiday they spent together. On December 26th, Hope planned to visit her grandmother, who lived about 30 miles away, for lunch. However, during the drive, she called her grandmother in a distressed voice, saying someone was following her and asking for help. The call was suddenly disconnected, leading Hope's mother and grandmother to rush out to search for her. About 5 miles from their location, they noticed Hope's car parked on the side of a rural road, but Hope was missing. Her grandmother immediately called 911. The call was sent to the county sheriff's office, and it was classified as a missing person case. Quick action is crucial in such situations. One of the sheriff's office deputies arrived at the scene and examined Hope's car. It was undamaged and in working order, so an accident was ruled out. A forensic team searched the vehicle but discovered no clues about Hope's location. Volunteers and police began searching the neighborhood for any clues. Gary, Hope's husband, who was visibly upset, arrived at the scene and told the police that Hope intended to stop at a gas station on her way to visit her grandmother. This was the only information the detectives had at that moment. Hope's house was about 30 miles from her grandmother's, and there were 4 gas stations along that route. The detectives decided to check each gas station one by one. At the first gas station, the detective in charge of the case reviewed security camera footage in hopes of spotting Hope. Gary mentioned that she left their home around 11:45 a.m., so the detective requested footage from the hour leading up to her distressed call at 12:19 p.m. Initially, a male customer entered the store, and everything seemed normal. 3 minutes later, a woman appeared on the video. Hope was described as being blonde, approximately 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighing around 140 pounds, and wearing a pink shirt and blue jeans. However, the detective quickly noted that the woman in the footage was taller than Hope, so it wasn't her. The detective continued to review the tape until 12:45 p.m., but there was no sign of Hope, indicating she may have gotten gas at a different station. Meanwhile, Hope's family was grappling with shock and trying to find reasons for her disappearance. They were hopeful that she was safe and would return home soon. The detective investigating Hope's disappearance visited a second gas station located just 10 miles from where her abandoned car was discovered. This station had surveillance cameras that could provide important evidence. Upon arriving, the detective spoke with the manager and explained that they were searching for a missing woman. After describing Hope's appearance and the car she was driving, the manager remembered possibly seeing her around noon. The footage from the outside camera confirmed that Hope had been at this gas station before she vanished. She had filled up her car and seemed untroubled at that time. Another camera recorded a man holding the door open for her as she entered the store. After buying gas, Hope left the store looking cheerful, as if she was eager to spend time with her grandmother. Upon reviewing the video again, the detective became more interested in the man who had opened the door for Hope than in Hope herself. The footage showed a man in a white cap following her inside. He glanced at her while she paid for her gas and exited the store. The detective decided to focus on identifying the man in the cap, but the footage did not reveal any clues about his identity. The detective aimed to identify the car of a man seen in surveillance footage. One of the recordings showed Hope walking towards the store to pay for gas. At that moment, a dark minivan arrived, and a man wearing a white cap got out, but the license plate was not visible. The detective then switched to another camera that captured Hope driving away from the gas station. As she returned to her car, a gray car appeared, and its driver watched her leave. Neither this driver nor the man in the white cap followed Hope out of the gas station. The detective replayed the footage multiple times to catch every detail, convinced there were more clues in the gas station video. He returned to the footage of Hope walking back to her car and noticed another vehicle, a striking red Chevy. This car crossed the parking lot and headed toward the exit, following Hope as she drove away. The detective realized that he had seen this car tailing Hope right before her disappearance. With evidence that she had been followed from the gas station, the police needed to determine what happened next. The search party discovered alarming evidence 6 miles from Hope's abandoned car, a pink bracelet and a blood-stained blanket. Hope's husband identified the bracelet as a Christmas gift he had given her, raising serious concerns about her safety. On her way to her grandmother's house, Hope passed an office building equipped with numerous surveillance cameras. However, the building was closed for Christmas, making it difficult for the detective to find an office manager with access to the CCTV system. Eventually, he located someone who had the keys and could operate the cameras. The surveillance system only recorded when there was movement, so the detective began reviewing footage from just after noon. He saw Hope's car enter the frame at 12:06 p.m., followed 2 seconds later by the red Chevy seen at the gas station, which was trailing just a few yards behind her. Both vehicles were heading north toward the wooded area where Hope's car was discovered. Although the footage did not clearly show license plates, the red Chevy was recognizable, leading the police to issue an all-points bulletin, APB, for it. It took about an hour or two before this red vehicle was stopped by police on a street in Jefferson, South Carolina. The driver was 23-year-old local resident Nicholas Miller. There was no one else in the car besides him, and he was very nervous when the police pulled him over. Perhaps he had something to hide. He was brought to the police station, where a detective questioned him. Miller answered all questions evasively. The detective asked Miller to describe how he had spent the day, what he had been doing, and where he had been. Miller replied that he had spent the morning shopping at a Walmart store 30 minutes away. He then drove back to Jefferson. Police requested a search warrant for Miller's car, and the detective investigating Hope Melton's disappearance went to Walmart, where Miller said he shopped. Police had to check his story. The store had numerous cameras recording everything that happens on the sales floor. He was driving a red Chevy, and at about 10 a.m., his car pulled into the parking lot. When the driver got out, the detective saw that it was indeed Miller. So far, his story was confirmed. He just walked into Walmart like it was a normal day, like hundreds of other shoppers, and nothing out of the ordinary seemed to be going on. It seemed like he was just going about his normal business. He didn't take a shopping cart or shopping basket, but as the tape played, the detective realized that Miller was no ordinary shopper. He seemed to be just hanging around the store, uninterested in the merchandise being sold there. Perhaps he was in the store for an entirely different purpose. At one point, the detective noticed that Miller was following a woman, who was not paying attention to him but was minding her own business. Reviewing the footage further, the detective became convinced that his assumption was correct. Wherever the woman went, Miller followed her. However, a few moments later, she reappeared in the footage again, this time with a man. At this point, it would be safe to assume that Miller realized that this was an unrealistic target for him. A few minutes later, the couple left the store. Investigators speculated that the woman may have been lucky to escape. After a few more minutes, cameras captured Miller leaving the store. As he exited Walmart, it appeared that he was frustrated because a potential target had slipped from his grasp. We can only assume at this point that he was heading back to Jefferson, where he would eventually meet Hope at a gas station. Hope's family had hoped for her safe return home, but when the police obtained a search warrant for Miller's car, it became clear that something terrible had happened to Hope. While examining the car, forensic investigators saw blood spatter on the passenger side fender and on the driver's side bumper. They also found Hope's wallet in Miller's car. Now that the authorities had new evidence, the decision was made to question Miller again. It is important to note that the interrogation was conducted by Chesterfield County Sheriff Sam Parker, a person whose name is significant during this case. During the interrogation, Miller began to deny his involvement in Hope Melton's disappearance, but when informed of the evidence found, he finally admitted his guilt and agreed to take the police to Hope's body. Miller led detectives to a remote turkey farm, 14 miles from where Hope's car was found. She was lying on the ground, on her back, face up, with no clothes on, an utterly horrific scene. Miller was unable to give any reasonable explanation for why he had done it. Hope's family was informed of the discovery of her body. What had happened to her had forever changed the lives of those who knew and loved Hope Melton. Now, the police could finally piece together the events that led to Hope's death. Investigators learned that Miller had recently broken up with his girlfriend, which they believed may have triggered his nervous breakdown. At the gas station, Miller saw Hope filling up her car and decided to follow her. Hope had just enjoyed a wonderful Christmas with her family and was looking forward to spending a special day with her grandmother. Unbeknownst to her, someone was tracking her movements. Once they were on a secluded road, Hope realized she was in danger and called her grandmother for help. Miller later confessed that he had forced Hope off the road, dragged her from her car, and shoved her into his vehicle. He then took her into the woods, assaulted her, and committed further atrocities. To conceal his crime, Miller took Hope to a turkey farm, where he abused, then brutally beat her to death with a baseball bat and disposed of her body. What began as a routine gas stop turned into a terrifying encounter with a predator, leading to a tragic outcome for Hope. The details of this crime are unimaginable. Nicholas Miller has been charged with multiple offenses as the trial approaches. Additionally, his ex-girlfriend provided disturbing evidence, including photos showing Miller chasing her in his car just hours before he kidnapped Hope Melton. Now let's focus on Chesterfield County Sheriff Sam Parker. Parker was fired from the police force for several reasons. Officials accuse him of giving preferential treatment to inmates, taking property meant for the sheriff's office for personal use, providing uniforms, badges, and weapons to civilians. He allowed 2 inmates to live and sleep outside the jail in exchange for doing work on his property. While at the Chesterfield County Prison, where the inmates were allowed to sleep, they had access to the internet, phones, and unlimited unsupervised visitors, all with Parker's knowledge. Prosecutors also claimed that Parker gave inmates special privileges, such as alcohol and unsupervised visits with women. The inmates were allowed to go shopping and eat at restaurants in return for allegedly doing work on Parker's house and personal property. Consequently, Parker faced trial. During the trial, a prisoner, who is serving a 15-year sentence for arson, testified against Parker. He stated that while in the Chesterfield County Jail, he was able to furnish his cell with flat-screen TVs, a refrigerator, and a new mattress, purchasing these items with money sent by his family. A prisoner informed jurors that he had lunch with deputies and was allowed to buy and wear regular clothes instead of his jail uniform. He mentioned that he worked at one of the county's impound lots, where he had access to the internet, phones, and a Facebook account. Eventually, he was moved from jail to the sheriff's office, where he engaged in intimate activities with a female visitor, celebrated his birthday with a party that featured filet mignon and alcohol. It's quite unusual for an inmate to host a party at the sheriff's office. He also stated that a deputy drove him and another inmate in a marked sheriff's office car to Florence, South Carolina, for a lunch date with a female friend. He explained how he became close to Parker by working at his home, attending church with him, and giving gifts to Parker's daughter. In 2014, Parker was convicted of 5 counts of misconduct in office, 2 counts of providing contraband to inmates, and 1 count of embezzlement. He received a 2-year prison sentence with the possibility of parole. As the judge prepared to announce the sentence, the former sheriff became emotional, expressing remorse to the residents of Chesterfield County, his family, and friends. After the verdict was delivered, Parker apologized to his family for the shame he caused and to his fellow law enforcement officers. Previously, Sheriff Sam Parker had interrogated Miller, who confessed to the crime and led the police to Hope Melton's body. Initially, Miller was facing the death penalty, but the sheriff's office actions prevented prosecutors from pursuing that option. During the interrogation, the sheriff promised Miller that if he confessed and disclosed what happened to Hope Melton, he would not receive the death penalty. However, the sheriff did not have the authority to make such a promise. Believing the sheriff, Miller confessed to the crime, which ultimately compromised the case. Attorney Dan Johnson issued a statement saying former Chesterfield County Sheriff Sam Parker had seriously damaged the case. Johnson explained that Sheriff Parker secured a confession from Nicholas Miller by making an illegal promise not to pursue the death penalty. Due to Parker's serious misconduct in coercing Miller's confession with this promise, all statements made in relation to it should be excluded from the trial. In March 2015, 26-year-old Nicholas Miller admitted guilt to all charges and received a life sentence without the chance for parole. Hope Melton's family was outraged and frustrated with the former sheriff. Hope's mother, Elizabeth, expressed disappointment, as they had hoped for a death penalty sentence for Miller. The family is still waiting for an apology from Parker while actively seeking justice and working to honor Hope Melton's memory.
As the sun set over Veracruz, Sylvia Jazmin got into her red car after enjoying a relaxing pedicure. She had just shared a warm meal with her mom and hoped to be home for dinner. Everything seemed normal. She parked by a quiet bus terminal, unaware that someone was watching her closely. The evening felt familiar calm. Then, suddenly, something happened. Hours later, Sylvia had vanished. Sylvia Jazmin Armendariz Alpuche was born in 1994 in a city in Veracruz, Mexico. She was the only daughter of Jose, an engineer in the oil industry, and Sylvia Alpuche, a dedicated homemaker who focused on raising her daughter. From a young age, Sylvia excelled academically. Thanks to her family's stable financial situation, she was able to attend a good school and fully embrace the opportunity. In addition to her academic success, Sylvia demonstrated exceptional talent in drawing and public speaking, receiving many awards during her school years. After graduating from high school, she studied industrial engineering in Mexico City. She also had a strong interest in languages. Through her determination and hard work, she became certified in both English and French, which provided her with opportunities that many only dream of. As a young adult, Sylvia gained independence and started her professional career at a large state-owned company in the petroleum and natural gas industry. However, her life wasn't solely about work and ambition. She cherished moments with her family, her close friends, and her 3 dogs. Like many young women, she envisioned getting married and starting a family one day. This dream began to take shape when she met a young man named Aldo. Aldo and Sylvia's life together is not well documented. Some sources indicate they met at work, while others believe it was at a gym. Regardless of the circumstances, they began dating. However, their relationship deteriorated quickly as Aldo became possessive and controlling, which conflicted with Sylvia's independent and determined personality. They eventually broke up between May and June of 2019. Sylvia moved on, concentrating on her personal goals and the life she was creating. On August 14, 2019, everything changed. That morning began just like any other day. Sylvia had breakfast with her mother, and later, they enjoyed lunch together, a tradition they both cherished. This would unknowingly be their last meal together. At around 4:30 p.m., Sylvia left home in her red car for a pedicure appointment downtown. Shortly after, she sent her mother a picture of her freshly painted toenails, assuring her she would be back in time for dinner. However, as night fell, Sylvia did not return home. Her mother became increasingly anxious and tried calling her, but there was no answer. She sent messages to find out if Sylvia's plans had changed. The response she received felt off. It lacked the usual warmth and affection that Sylvia always expressed, filling her with a sense of dread. By the early morning hour, her initial unease had escalated into a full-blown panic. She reached out to her family, hoping that someone might have seen or heard from Sylvia, but no one had. In a last attempt to find answers, she contacted Sylvia's friends, including Andrea, her daughter's closest friend. Andrea, who was also 25 and from Veracruz, had an impressive background like Sylvia's. She had excelled academically and earned a degree in petroleum engineering. Andrea specialized in oil well productivity, held multiple certifications, including one in English, and even started her own business in 2018. She was engaged and in the midst of planning her wedding. Despite their hectic schedules, Andrea and Sylvia remained close friends. Their bond started in preschool and grew stronger throughout high school, making them feel like sisters. On August 15th, Andrea told Sylvia's mother that she had talked to Sylvia the day before, but had not been in touch since. Worried, Sylvia's mother asked Andrea to call Aldo, as she had been blocked by him. Andrea reached out, but Aldo said he hadn't spoken to Sylvia in more than a week. His indifferent response did not help alleviate anyone's worries. As the hours went by without any news from Sylvia, her parents' initial concern turned into deep worry. They ultimately decided to report her missing at the local police station. Shortly after filing the report, the police found Sylvia's red car parked near a bus terminal, but there was no sign of her. Time passed slowly until a call from an oil company worker led to a shocking discovery. While clearing an area near the pipelines, workers noticed human remains discarded in a makeshift dump by Cosoleacaque Nueva Tiapa Highway in southern Veracruz. When the police arrived, they found a disturbing scene. The only identifiable remains were two lower legs, clearly belonging to a woman. The rest of the body had been severely burned and was unrecognizable. Investigators only had the legs to identify the victim, so they contacted Sylvia's parents. When her mother saw a photograph of the remains, she instantly recognized them as her daughter's due to the nail design, which matched a photo Sylvia had sent her just hours before she went missing. However, forensic verification was essential. The remains were sent to the medical examiner, and DNA results a few days later confirmed the heartbreaking truth. The body was that of 25-year-old Sylvia. The forensic analysis revealed a horrific scenario. Sylvia had been shot in the head, but the bullet wound alone was not the cause of death. Experts determined that she had died after being set on fire while still alive, wrapped in flammable plastic bags, which explained why her lower legs had not entirely burned. Armed with this disturbing evidence, investigators began to look into Sylvia's social life. During their discussions with family and friends, one name kept coming up: Aldo Castellan, her ex-boyfriend. Their breakup had been due to his possessiveness and jealousy, raising immediate concerns. When the police attempted to find Aldo, he had disappeared. His family claimed they did not know his whereabouts. This led to increasing suspicion that he had not simply vanished, but had received assistance to escape. Online speculation surged, filled with alleged sightings and rumors about where he might be. Meanwhile, Sylvia's family prepared for her burial, mourning deeply as they laid her to rest at the local cemetery. Her parents, heartbroken, struggled to comprehend how their lively and accomplished daughter had met such a tragic fate. As the investigation into Aldo escalated, authorities learned troubling details about his background. Just before Sylvia's murder, he had taken a 30-day leave from work. He also deleted all his social media accounts and severed connections with his former friends and acquaintances. His history was alarming. During his time as a student, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and frequently exhibited aggressive behavior. He often arrived at school armed and confronted classmates aggressively. Despite numerous concerns voiced by people at his university, he faced no repercussions, reportedly protected by his father, who was also known for his explosive temper. Further investigation showed that Aldo escaped using an ambulance from the state-owned petroleum company where Sylvia worked. He reportedly received help from an uncle in planning his escape. In response to this elusive and potentially dangerous fugitive, the Attorney General's office announced a reward of 400,000 pesos for any information that could lead to his capture. Meanwhile, Sylvia's mother channeled her grief into activism. She organized rallies, distributed flyers featuring Sylvia's photo, and demanded justice. Her efforts joined a growing movement of families in Mexico, determined to ensure their daughters' stories are not forgotten. When the global issue began in early 2020, leading to lockdowns and restrictions, Sylvia's family and supporters quickly adapted. They utilized social media to organize virtual campaigns and protests, determined to keep her case in the public eye. For several months, there was no progress in the investigation. However, on July 14, 2020, nearly a year after Sylvia's death, there was a significant breakthrough. Aldo, now 32, was arrested. Officials attributed his capture to diligent investigative efforts, while media outlets suggested it was a stroke of luck. Police had received an anonymous tip about a man causing a disturbance at a public transport stop. When officers arrived to question him, he brandished a knife but was subdued and identified as the fugitive. Upon confirming his identity, Authorities noted that there was an active warrant for his arrest for the femicide of Sylvia. While in hiding, Aldo took many steps to avoid being found. He lived in a well-supplied home that helped him stay hidden for several months. He also changed his appearance a lot by gaining weight and growing his hair long. When he was finally questioned, he claimed not to know Sylvia, but it didn't take long for his lie to fall apart. Aldo was arrested and moved to a social reintegration center, where he was formally charged with Sylvia's murder and with attempting to destroy evidence by burning her remains. Soon after his arrest, his mother shared a letter online declaring her son's innocence. She argued that there was no solid evidence against him and suggested that he was being unfairly targeted simply because he was Sylvia's ex-partner. In her statement, she claimed that Aldo had suffered physical abuse at the hands of the police, who she accused of trying to coerce a confession. She also criticized law enforcement for not exploring other potential leads in the case. While she expressed compassion for Sylvia's family, she pledged to advocate for what she believes to be the truth about her son. Aldo's mother said her son had gone into hiding for nearly a year because their family was receiving death threats. When Aldo was found, it brought relief to Sylvia's family and friends, as many thought the case was close to being resolved and that justice was finally coming. However, just when it seemed closure was within reach, unexpected news changed everything. On December 3, 2020, the police arrested Andrea, Sylvia's lifelong best friend, in connection with the crime. This news shocked Sylvia's family and the community. Andrea was a key advocate for justice, even providing the crucial voice message in which Sylvia identified Aldo as her potential killer. She supported Sylvia's mother during protests, allowed her phone to be analyzed for evidence, and was widely recognized as a vital force in maintaining attention on the case. However, authorities accused her of involvement in the crime, stating they had strong evidence against her. Prosecutors reported that several protected witnesses came forward, with one claiming that Andrea had been secretly involved with Aldo while he was with Sylvia. These allegations caused distress among those who knew both women. Andrea rejected all accusations, insisting that she had been in a serious relationship with another man she intended to marry before her arrest disrupted those plans. She provided a detailed account of her activities on the day Sylvia went missing. She claimed she had visited a spa, forgot her wallet, and called her mother to bring it to her. Her mother confirmed that they returned home together around 8:30 p.m. However, cell tower data contradicted their story. Analysis of the phones belonging to Sylvia, Aldo, and Andrea showed that all three were at the same location around the time the crime likely happened. This discovery led to new protests, this time initiated by Andrea's parents, who argued that their daughter was being wrongly accused for not testifying against Aldo. By early 2021, Aldo and Andrea started sharing their perspectives on the situation through letters and social media posts from their detention centers. In one handwritten note, Andrea expressed her gratitude to those supporting her and her family. She hoped that the prosecution would take a closer look at the evidence and reconsider the possibility of a mistake. Meanwhile, Andrea's parents initiated a social media campaign to share photos, documents, and her side of the story. They also called for the anonymous witnesses who accused her to be revealed, arguing that transparency is crucial for ensuring a fair trial. Despite their efforts, the outcome remained unchanged. In September 2022, after a long and emotionally intense trial, 27-year-old Andrea was found guilty of murdering Sylvia and sentenced to 70 years in prison. The judge referred to the so-called overwhelming evidence, especially the geolocation data from Andrea's phone, which showed she was at the crime scene during the crucial time. For Sylvia's parents, the verdict provided some legal closure, but it did not bring peace. Meanwhile, for Andrea's family, this verdict marked the start of a new struggle, one against a sentence they believed was based on flawed evidence. Andrea's defense attorney criticized both the prosecution and the judge, arguing that the trial was affected by inconsistencies and weak evidence. From the defense's viewpoint, Andrea was condemned not for any proven involvement in the crime, but for her refusal to testify against Aldo. Although she knew about the violent relationship between Sylvia and Aldo, Andrea had never seen the crime occur and lacked concrete proof to blame anyone. Her mother publicly condemned what she called a flawed investigation, highlighting that, Even though 4 alleged eyewitnesses came forward a year after the crime, none had actually witnessed the event take place. There was no solid proof of a romantic relationship between Andrea and Aldo, which prosecutors used to suggest they were involved together. The main issue was the cell phone geolocation data. Prosecutors argued that this data placed Andrea at the crime scene and claimed it came from her phone. Meanwhile, the lawyer argued that Andrea was being unfairly blamed, serving as a convenient scapegoat for a public demanding justice. After the investigators struggled to create a solid case against Aldo, they shifted their focus to Andrea, perhaps to avoid confronting their shortcomings. In November 2022, Andrea's legal team filed an appeal with the Superior Court, seeking to have her conviction overturned. They also requested an investigation into possible abuses of power and political interference, highlighting actions by the then governor of Veracruz. Andrea's family was hopeful that the higher court would act fairly and give her a chance to demonstrate her innocence. After nearly 2 years, Andrea achieved a significant breakthrough. She was granted a federal writ of protection, a legal order from the federal courts. The court determined that her trial had serious procedural issues. The federal court has ordered a new trial, which allows previously withheld evidence to be presented. This decision gives Andrea a fresh opportunity to prove her innocence and possibly regain her freedom. The most recent development in Andrea's case took place on April 21, 2025, during an important hearing. Her mother reported that the new defense team introduced verified geolocation data connected to Andrea's actual phone evidence that had inexplicably been left out during her first trial. This data challenges the prosecution's claims and could undermine the basis of the original conviction. However, as of May 2025, Andrea's release had not been officially decided. At the same time, Aldo's legal proceedings were facing significant delays, and official records showed that his trial had not yet started. Despite several requests from his defense team for house arrest, a judge upheld his preventive detention in 2024. By March 2025, Sylvia's mother, along with friends and supporters, organized a protest calling for Aldo to be put on trial. During the protest, she raised concerns about why the accused had not yet faced justice while in custody. The prosecutor's office provided vague explanations, mentioning that procedural delays were due to ongoing legal appeals. Sylvia's case has become emblematic of the fight for justice in a country plagued by gender-based violence, which continues to affect many lives. What originally seemed to be a closed case has now raised serious issues about due process, corruption, and the impact of delayed justice. The ongoing debate questions whether Andrea was truly involved in her friend's murder or if she is an innocent victim caught in a broken legal system. Should Andrea be released? She is innocent or guilty. A young woman was on her way home after spending a night out with friends, but she never arrived. Jessica Lynn Callagher was born on May 8, 1982 in Austin, Texas, where she lived with her parents and 2 brothers. Jessica was warm, friendly, and easily made friends. Beyond her sociable nature, she was very ambitious, had a clear goal since high school. She wanted to become a teacher. To achieve this, she enrolled at Texas State University and earned her bachelor's degree in science. Jessica then decided to pursue a master's degree while working as a teaching assistant at an elementary school and taking a part-time job at a grocery store. Despite her busy schedule, she maintained a positive attitude, believing that her hard work would eventually lead to success. On September 7, 2009, Jessica had a day off. She spent it with her friends and cousin, Melanie. They began the day by lounging at the pool and went out for dinner. Afterwards, they visited a bar to play pool. At the end of the night, Jessica became the designated driver, ensuring everyone got home safely. She dropped off Melanie last, around 1:30 in the morning. Melanie invited Jessica to stay over, but Jessica declined since she had an early shift at the grocery store and needed to stop at a 24-hour shop to buy food for her dogs. After saying goodbye to her cousin, she left. A few hours later, as morning arrived, Melanie got a call from one of Jessica's co-workers. She learned that Jessica had missed her shift, which was unusual since Jessica never skipped work without a valid reason. At that time, Jessica had been promoted to store manager, adding to her responsibilities. Weren't he worried? Melanie called over several friends, but none had heard from Jessica that morning. She then contacted her brother, John Ridenour, who lived with Jessica. John told Melanie he hadn't seen her either. John, a police officer, had started his shift at 5:30 a.m. and hadn't noticed if Jessica had come home during the night. He also hadn't checked her room before leaving for work. Concerned, he quickly returned home. But Jessica was still missing. It seemed she hadn't been home at all, as her dogs were acting unusually, almost as if they hadn't been fed in a while. This raised alarm bells. Something was definitely wrong. John quickly contacted his colleagues at the police department to track Jessica's phone. The signal led them to a restaurant near her home. Melanie and her boyfriend hurried to the restaurant and soon found Jessica's car in the parking lot. However, when they approached and opened the door, they were horrified to see that Jessica was slumped in the driver's seat, unresponsive. Her skin was badly sunburned, and the inside of the car was extremely hot. Melanie's boyfriend immediately called the police, who sent officers and an ambulance to the scene. Paramedics confirmed that Jessica was dead, and her body was taken for further investigation. It was evident that she had likely been attacked. Investigators started looking into Jessica's car. They quickly noticed that the driver's seat was pushed too far back. Given the injuries she had, detectives believed she might have been attacked while still in the car. They also found that her keys, wallet, and credit cards were missing. On the back seat, there was a bag of dog food, indicating that Jessica had been in the car since the night before, as she intended to go to the store right after dropping off her cousin. After searching the car thoroughly, detectives entered the restaurant near the parking lot where Jessica's car was found. This is when the investigation took an unexpected twist. One of the restaurant employees informed the investigators that when she arrived for work early that morning, she saw Jessica's car and noticed that Jessica was still alive at that time. The witness reported that Jessica was sitting inside her car, completely undressed and behaving oddly, as if she were under the influence. Although the scene was unusual, the employee didn't dwell on it and went inside to begin her shift. Shortly after, she stepped outside again and saw Jessica sitting by her car. Jessica had put her clothes back on but was still acting strangely, just sitting there and running her hands through her hair. When the employee went outside a third time, Jessica was back in her car, talking to herself and making odd hand gestures. The police later discovered several more witnesses who had seen Jessica alive that morning. Despite her unusual behavior, no one called for help or checked on her well-being. After interviewing the witnesses, detectives returned to Melanie and asked if Jessica might have been drinking alcohol or taking banned substance. Melanie firmly stated that Jessica had been sober that night, as she was the designated driver responsible for getting everyone home safely and had work the next day. She also claimed that Jessica had never used banned substance. The situation puzzled the investigators, but they later uncovered a possible explanation. Medical examiners discovered signs of strangulation on Jessica's body, including marks from hands and a likely rope or belt. She also had numerous bruises, scratches, and she had been abuse assaulted. Experts noted that her trauma could have resulted in a brain injury, which was worsened by the hours she spent inside a hot car in the sun. This might clarify her unusual behavior, her disorientation, and why she didn't call for help. It is likely that Jessica was so affected that she didn't understand what was happening to her, eventually leading to death. Toxicology reports confirm Melanie's earlier statement. Jessica had no alcohol or banned substance in her system. If any of the witnesses had called for medical assistance, doctors might have been able to save her, but it was now too late. Detectives needed to determine who was responsible for her death. They began by searching for CCTV footage, but unfortunately, there were no cameras in the parking lot where Jessica was found. However, they made an important discovery. If she had bought dog food late at night, it was likely that she stopped at the 24-hour Walmart across the street. The detectives obtained the store's security footage, which showed Jessica arriving, walking into the store alone, and there were no indications that anything was wrong. She went straight to the pet food aisle, picked up a large bag, and proceeded to the checkout. Everything appeared normal, but as she exited the store, detectives observed something noteworthy. Just a few seconds later, a man followed her outside. Detectives reviewed more footage and noted that the man arrived at Walmart just minutes before Jessica. He parked at the far end of the parking lot, entered the store, but instead of shopping, he went straight to the restroom and then left. When detectives checked the entrance camera, they saw him following closely behind Jessica and appearing to be in a hurry. However, there was an issue. Jessica's car was parked behind a large tree, which blocked the camera's view. Despite this, the footage allowed them to track the man's movements. He approached Jessica's car, went behind the tree, and did not emerge again. 2 minutes later, Jessica's car exited the parking lot. A surveillance camera later recorded a vehicle arriving at the restaurant parking lot where Jessica was discovered the next morning. Shortly after, an individual got out of Jessica's car and walked across the lot toward the parking area of Walmart. This individual then got into the same vehicle that a suspicious man had driven earlier. Detectives were nearly certain that this person was involved in Jessica's murder, but the quality of the surveillance footage made it difficult to identify him or his vehicle clearly. However, the detectives still had some options. With Jessica's credit cards missing, they examined her accounts for any recent transactions and discovered a lead. One of her cards had been used at a gas station approximately 20 minutes after her car was left at the restaurant. They obtained the gas station's surveillance footage and quickly recognized the red pickup truck associated with their suspect. When they checked the camera near the register, their suspicions were confirmed. It was indeed the same man. This provided proof that he had Jessica's credit card, making him appear even more guilty. The detectives then released the footage of the suspect and his vehicle to the news, seeking help from the public for any information about him. Detectives continued their search for more evidence, but found no new leads. Days went by without any significant developments until they received a call from a woman. She claimed that the man in the security footage resembled her fiancé's best friend, Crispin Harmel. She also mentioned that Crispin was expected to visit that evening to repay some money he owed, but he never arrived. After seeing the news report about Jessica's murder, she recognized him in the surveillance video. Although she was shocked to think he could be involved in such a terrible crime, she understood that she needed to inform the police. Detectives started investigating Crispin's background and soon found a significant detail. Just weeks before Jessica's murder, a patrol officer had stopped him for driving with an expired license. When the investigators examined the officer's body camera footage, they noticed that Crispin closely matched the description of their suspect. Moreover, he was wearing the same baseball cap as the person in the surveillance video. 5 days after Jessica's murder, police visited Crispin's home. They immediately noticed his pickup truck, which was the same model as the one captured on surveillance footage. However, there were some changes. The chrome details visible in the video had been painted over in black. When detectives knocked on his door, Crispin surprised them by quickly admitting that he had met Jessica that night. He explained that they connected through an adult website and arranged to meet for a casual hookup. Crispin said they met in the Walmart parking lot, where he got into Jessica's car. He claimed she drove them to a park, where they had intimate before returning to Walmart. Before parting ways, they talked in her car, during which he mentioned his financial struggles. According to him, Jessica then gave him her credit card so he could buy gas. After saying their goodbyes, they went their separate ways. The next day, after seeing news reports about Jessica's murder, Crispin panicked and feared he might be accused. He disposed of her credit card and repainted parts of his truck. Although Crispin recounted his story confidently, detectives recognized it as a lie, viewing it as a desperate attempt to evade responsibility. The surveillance footage contradicted his account. He claimed they had planned to meet in the Walmart parking lot, but he only approached Jessica after she had returned to her car. He also said she drove him back after their supposed meeting, but the footage clearly showed him walking back to his own truck alone. Jessica's car remained in the parking lot until the next morning, and no one else interacted with it. Detectives collected Crispin's phone and computer, as well as Jessica's devices, because they suspected there was no evidence of communication between them. No messages, no calls, nothing. In fact, Jessica had never visited the adult website that Crispin claimed they used to arrange their meeting. However, when investigators examined Crispin's computer, they discovered something noteworthy. Just hours after the police found Jessica's body, he searched for and read several news articles about her murder. Jessica's friends and family also doubted Crispin's story. They believed she would never seek a one-night stand or meet a stranger in a parking lot at night. That behavior was simply not in her character. Additionally, she had told a friend that she needed to rest before her morning shift and still had to feed her dogs. There was no way she would have gone out for a secret late-night date. Investigators thought that Crispin was trying to shift the blame onto others. However, the overwhelming evidence against him made it difficult for him to create a credible excuse. Based on the surveillance footage, detectives reconstructed the likely sequence of events. Crispin probably saw Jessica inside Walmart and decided to target her. He followed her to her car, got in, and used threats to prevent her from crying out or resisting. It seems he then forced her to drive to a nearby park, where he abused her. Afterward, he returned to the parking lot near Walmart, closer to his own truck. Before leaving, he strangled her and took her wallet and credit cards. When the police confronted Crispin about the incident, he stopped answering questions and requested a lawyer. Despite there being strong evidence against him, investigators faced a significant challenge that could jeopardize the entire case. Jessica had survived for several hours after the attack, which posed a major legal issue. The problem was that medical experts could not definitively explain why this occurred. Cases like hers were so rare that they had not been thoroughly studied. While the official cause of death was identified as strangulation, there had never been a documented case of someone being strangled, surviving for hours, and then dying later as a direct result of the attack. The only way to solidify the case would be a confession, but Crispin refused to admit to any wrongdoing. Detectives faced a challenging situation. They believed that Crispin was guilty of Jessica's murder, as no one else could have committed the crime. However, since Jessica had survived until the morning after the attack, there was a significant concern that the case might not hold up in court. To bolster their case, investigators examined Jessica's car for more evidence, but found nothing. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, and no other evidence linking Crispin to the crime scene. Prosecutors discovered a temporary way to proceed. They charged Crispin with evidence tampering linked to Jessica's case. Crispin had confessed to disposing of her credit card and repainting his truck, which were obvious attempts to conceal his actions. They had his own admissions as evidence. In May 2010, Crispin pleaded guilty and received a 10-year prison sentence for evidence tampering. Detectives were committed to achieving justice for Jessica and refused to give up. They needed strong scientific evidence to link Crispin to her murder. For years, their efforts led to no significant breakthroughs. Then in 2013, they found a scientific article that changed the course of the investigation. The article discussed cases in which strangulation did not immediately cause death, but instead resulted in a condition called delayed death syndrome. This syndrome can lead to brain damage, causing victims to feel confused, disoriented, and unable to seek help. The article's findings closely aligned with Jessica's behavior following the attack and reinforced the initial medical examiner's belief that she had suffered a brain injury, leaving her unaware of her situation until it was too late. Detectives contacted the author of this article right away and began constructing a murder case against Crispin using advanced medical sciences support. In May 2014, Crispin was officially arrested for murder, but he still maintained his innocence throughout the process. During the trial, his defense attorney emphasized a critical point. There was no DNA evidence linking Crispin to the crime. The prosecution contended that Jessica had fought back during the attack and likely scratched her assailant, which should have left DNA traces under her fingernails. However, forensic experts for the prosecution highlighted an important detail. Jessica had been trapped in her car for hours in extreme heat. At such high temperatures, DNA breaks down quickly, and by the time her body was examined, any genetic material under her nails would have completely degraded and been unrecoverable. Prosecutors built their case against Crispin using strong forensic evidence and extensive surveillance footage that strongly indicated his guilt. However, a complication arose when Crispin's lawyer challenged the accuracy of the timestamps on the video evidence. Initially, the footage obtained from the security cameras did not have any timestamps. Since the timing of events was critical, prosecutors applied specialized software to add timestamps later, which gave the defense a chance to question the integrity of the evidence. Crispin's attorney contended that this was a significant issue because he had not received the original footage with the timestamps included. Ultimately, the judge ruled in favor of the defense, resulting in a mistrial. Consequently, Crispin avoided conviction due to this technicality. Nevertheless, he remained in prison, serving his 10-year sentence for evidence tampering. Prosecutors quickly started preparing for a new trial. Over the next few years, Crispin's legal team worked diligently to stop the retrial, arguing that it would violate his rights. Ultimately, however, a higher court decided in favor of the prosecution, allowing the trial to proceed. The new trial began in 2018, and this time, the prosecution meticulously addressed every aspect of the case, ensuring the defense couldn't take advantage of any loopholes. They successfully convinced the jury of Crispin's guilt, resulting in his conviction for murder. Crispin Harmel received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors opted not to seek the death penalty, believing it might jeopardize their chances of a guilty verdict. They were aware that the delayed death syndrome argument could create doubts for the jurors, and in death penalty cases, a conviction requires complete certainty. A few years later, Crispin attempted to appeal his sentence, but his request was turned down. Consequently, he is still in prison with very little chance of being released. Jessica's family expressed gratitude to the investigators and prosecutors for their unwavering commitment to seeking justice, even though it took 9 years to achieve a verdict. However, they also shared that they had hoped the sentencing would provide them with some relief and closure. But ultimately, no punishment for Crispin could ever really alleviate their suffering. A woman was discovered in her home under mysterious and alarming conditions. There were no leads or evidence for detectives to pursue, making it seem like the case would remain unsolved. However, an unexpected phone call changed everything. With one surprising clue, detectives revealed a truth that nobody could have anticipated. Kathy Blair was born on May 3rd, 1961 in California. She grew up in a caring family with her parents, a brother, and a sister. From a young age, she developed a strong love for the arts, especially music. Singing was her greatest passion. When it came time to choose a career, Kathy made her decision without hesitation. She enrolled at the University of Texas to study vocal performance and moved to Austin. After graduating, Kathy became a music teacher and a choir instructor at a Christian church. She loved her job, and her students admired her greatly. They recognized her deep passion for music, which inspired them. Throughout her life, Kathy was married 2 times, but both marriages ended in divorce. She raised her 2 children, a son and a daughter, as a single parent. In 2013, at the age of 52, Kathy relocated to a new home in a peaceful and safe suburb of Austin. She had long envisioned a place that met all her needs, and she had finally discovered the ideal one. By this time, her children were adults and living independently, while Kathy remained active in her music career, continued to lead the choir. In December 2014, Joseph Hargis, her 27-year-old son, came home to stay with his mother for a few weeks before his next military deployment. He wanted to spend some quality time with her. On December 5th, Joseph went out to meet friends and didn't come back until nearly noon the following day. When he entered the house, he called for his mom but was met with silence. Feeling uneasy, he started to check each room until he reached Kathy's bedroom. What he discovered there was horrifying. She was lying on the floor next to her bed in a pool of blood. Joseph instantly realized she was no longer alive. In a panic, he ran outside and called the police. When investigators arrived, they confirmed that Kathy had been dead for several hours. The large amount of blood at the scene indicated that this was a murder, not an accident. While medical experts examined the body, police began processing the crime scene. They immediately noticed that the drawers from a large jewelry box in her bedroom were pulled out and on the floor. It appeared the killer had taken some of Kathy's jewelry, which led detectives to initially suspect robbery as the motive. However, this theory felt questionable. For one, the intruder had not taken anything else. Valuable items like Kathy's laptop and phone were left untouched and in plain sight. The house showed no signs of being searched for more valuables, indicating the focus was solely on the jewelry. The timing of the break-in was unusual. Nighttime burglaries are rare. Most thieves typically break in during the day when people are at work. Additionally, this neighborhood was known as one of the safest in the city, making such crimes unexpected. Another puzzling aspect was the order of events. It appeared that the killer first murdered Kathy and then searched her home for valuables. Bloodstains on the jewelry box drawers and elsewhere in the bedroom indicated that the attack occurred before the robbery. This implies that the intruder attacked Kathy immediately upon entering her bedroom. There were no signs of forced entry at the front door, but investigators discovered that the back door was left unlocked. When they questioned Joseph about it, he mentioned that his mother frequently kept that door open. This led detectives to consider whether this was truly a robbery or if something more sinister was at play. They began to wonder if the killer had intended to murder Kathy from the start. If so, it raised a troubling possibility. Could the perpetrator have known her? Forensic experts faced significant challenges in their investigation, as they were unable to find any evidence to identify the killer. There were no fingerprints or DNA, leaving them without any leads. The only clue they discovered was a partial shoe print in Kathy's bedroom, found in her blood. Medical examiners concluded that Kathy had died from multiple stab wounds and exhibited signs of strangulation. Importantly, there was no indication of abuse, which strengthened detectives' belief that this crime was not random, but rather personal in nature. With no physical evidence to investigate, police turned their attention to Kathy's close connections, searching for anyone who might have a motive to harm her. They began with her son, as he had the opportunity to commit the crime. However, after verifying his alibi, detectives quickly eliminated him as a suspect. He had been with friends all night, and this was confirmed. Next, they interviewed Kathy's friends and colleagues in hopes of finding any conflicts or grievances, but everyone they spoke to stated that Kathy had no enemies. Kathy was well-liked, avoided conflicts, and dedicated most of her time to the choir. Just when it seemed like the investigation had reached a standstill, detectives uncovered a new lead. Several of Kathy's close friends revealed that she often talked about her second ex-husband, whom she had divorced 4 years prior to her murder. Kathy described their breakup as difficult. Her ex-husband continually harassed her and wouldn't accept their separation. She even confided in friends that she was concerned for her safety and requested that they not share her new address with him. Detectives located the ex-husband living not far from Austin. When they approached him, his reaction was alarming. As soon as they mentioned Kathy's death, he asked, "Was she shot?" This was suspicious. When they inquired about his activities that night, he claimed to have been in his RV for a short getaway. He allowed detectives to search his RV without a warrant, but they found no evidence, no weapons, no blood, and no signs tying him to the crime. With no solid evidence, they couldn't charge him. He remained a person of interest, but detectives had to keep searching for other potential suspects. A few days later, the detectives received an unexpected call from one of Kathy's friends with some unusual information. She and a group had organized a memorial service for Kathy, and during the ceremony, an unfamiliar man stood up to speak. Immediately, the attendees felt something was off about him. His tone and mannerisms made everyone uncomfortable. Even more puzzling was that none of Kathy's closest friends recognized him. Eventually, one of Kathy's friends identified the man. The friend had seen him before as a sales clerk at a local women's clothing store. The police tracked him down for questioning. The man admitted he had never met Kathy. He mentioned he had read about her murder and felt compelled to attend the memorial. While his explanation was odd, there was no evidence linking him to the crime, so the detectives had to let him go and continued their search for the killer. For several days, the investigation stalled until an unexpected development changed everything. A man contacted the police, claiming he had important information. He explained that he had recently purchased a new scope for his hunting rifle, which included a thermal imaging camera. Eager to try it out, he took a walk in the early hours of December 6th, heading towards a wooded area near his neighborhood. While walking, he noticed a car slowly driving by, which then pulled over to the side of the road. Moments later, a man exited the vehicle and walked down a nearby street, disappearing into the night. At the time, he didn't think much about it, but when he later heard about Kathy's murder, A connection clicked in his mind. He realized that the man he saw was heading in the direction of her house. He remembered that his thermal camera had been recording during his walk, so he reviewed the footage. To his surprise, he found the recording of the man clearly visible as he walked away from the car. This type of imaging only showed the suspect's silhouette, making it very difficult to identify him. However, the video still provided useful information. The man appeared tall, broad-shouldered, and had a unique walking style. Additionally, the camera captured his car, which gave investigators hope that they could at least identify the type of vehicle. They compared the man's height and build to two main suspects, Kathy's ex-husband and a suspicious man from the memorial, but neither matched the silhouette or the car seen in the video. This left the detectives even more uncertain about the involvement of both men, putting them back at the beginning of their investigation. In the following days, investigators continued to review the footage, hoping to find useful clues and identify new suspects. However, their efforts yielded no significant results, and the case reached a frustrating standstill once again. Then, on December 15th, a breakthrough occurred. That morning, a caretaker checking on an elderly couple, Sydney and Billy Shelton, called the police after noticing something was off when she arrived at their home. The front door was wide open, and there were obvious signs of forced entry at the lock. Upon entering the house, she went to the bedroom and was met with a horrifying scene. The couple was lying motionless in a pool of blood. Without delay, she contacted the police. Medical examiners later confirmed that both victims had been stabbed multiple times, just like Kathy. Detectives also observed a disturbing detail. Their jewelry box had been ransacked, with drawers opened and jewelry missing. Similar to Kathy's case, nothing else of value was taken. The striking parallels between this crime and Kathy's murder could not be overlooked. Investigators suspected from the start that the same perpetrator might be involved. The victims lived only 15 minutes apart. Both attacks occurred at night while they were sleeping, and in each instance, the killer emptied the jewelry boxes but left other valuables behind. From the beginning, investigators suspected that Kathy's murder could be personal, possibly committed by someone she knew. However, they soon had to reconsider this possibility. What if the victims were chosen at random for some unknown reason? Detectives searched for any links between Kathy and the Sheltons' common friends, places they frequented, anything that could connect them. Unfortunately, they found nothing. Their lives had never overlapped. This led to a frightening realization. They might be facing a serial killer. Suddenly, the case was not just about solving a murder. It turned into a race against time before he struck again. Police reached out to everyone connected to the victims, hoping someone would remember even the smallest detail that could help them identify the killer. They encouraged people to share any information, no matter how trivial it seemed, and, eventually, this approach proved effective. One of Kathy's friends recalled a conversation they had a few months prior to her murder. Kathy had mentioned an uncomfortable encounter with a handyman hired by her landlord to perform repairs at her house. She expressed that not only was the work done poorly, but the handyman's behavior also made her feel uneasy. Detectives reached out to the landlord, who helped them find the worker's contact information. This led them to a local resident named Timothy Parlin. They quickly learned that Timothy's brother regularly attended the church where the Sheltons were members, and Timothy himself had also been seen there. As they researched Timothy's background, they discovered something troubling. He had a criminal record with multiple arrests for theft, primarily targeting jewelry. At the time of the investigation, Timothy was on parole and staying in a long-term hotel. When detectives visited him, he agreed to answer their questions but requested to talk outside in the hotel parking lot instead of in his room. Initially, Timothy claimed not to remember Kathy, but as detectives provided more details, he recalled doing some repair work at her house. He firmly stated he was not involved in her murder and provided an alibi, saying he was working the night shift at a convenience store when Kathy was killed. However, detectives noticed discrepancies. Timothy was much shorter than the figure seen in the thermal camera footage, and his car did not match the one observed that night. With no concrete evidence to link him to the crime, they left without any further leads. An unexpected turn of events occurred. When detectives checked Timothy's alibi with his employer, They found out he had been fired a week before Kathy's murder, indicating he couldn't have been at work that night. The detectives hurried back to the hotel, but Timothy had already left. His wife answered the door and let them search their room, leading to a significant discovery. They found a pawn shop receipt showing Timothy had sold jewelry on the same day as Kathy's murder. The detectives went directly to the pawn shop and confirmed that the jewelry belonged to Kathy. Additionally, security footage from the shop's parking lot revealed that Timothy had not arrived in his own car, indicating he was using another vehicle. Upon checking the license plates, the police discovered the car belonged to Timothy's sister. This was vital because it closely resembled the car seen on the thermal camera the night of Kathy's murder. With this information, detectives obtained a warrant to search the vehicle. Forensic experts then examined the car and found blood traces on the front seat and floor. Lab results confirmed the blood belonged to Kathy. Police arrested Timothy and brought him in for questioning. Despite facing substantial evidence, he refused to confess and kept repeating, "These hands have never killed anyone." The detectives interrogated him for hours, pressing him on the evidence, and eventually, he began to crack, but not in the way they anticipated. He maintained his innocence, but claimed to know the actual murderer, a man named Sean Gant Benalcazar. Investigators were doubtful. The case against Timothy was strong, and his sudden shift in blame seemed like a desperate attempt to avoid responsibility. Nevertheless, they decided to investigate Sean as a precaution. The evidence they uncovered did not indicate that Sean was a murderer. Sean, a 30-year-old former science teacher with a degree in microbiology, had no criminal history and lived several hundred miles away from Austin, making his connection to the case seem unlikely. However, detectives wanted to be completely certain, so they traveled to his town to interview him. During the questioning, Sean acknowledged that he had met Timothy a few months earlier and found him to be suspicious. Although they hadn't communicated much since then, Sean made a surprising revelation. He had been in Austin on the nights of both murders. Furthermore, he disclosed that he had stayed at Timothy's house during that time, adding to the confusion of the situation. Initially, Sean stated that Timothy left the house without saying anything on the night Kathy was murdered. However, just minutes later, he changed his account and admitted they had gone to Kathy's house together. He claimed that Timothy got out of the car and came back a few minutes later with a bag that was stained with blood. When Sean looked inside the bag, he saw some jewelry. At that moment, he understood that Timothy had done something awful, but he maintained that he had no knowledge of what would happen and had never intended to be involved in any crime. As detectives continued to question Sean, he requested to use the restroom, and they allowed him to leave the room. One of the investigators observed him as he walked away and realized that his stride, posture, and movements were strikingly similar to the figure seen on the thermal camera the night Kathy was murdered. This observation raised serious doubts about Sean's honesty. The detectives began to strongly suspect that Sean might be the actual killer, but without a confession, they lacked solid evidence to build a case against him. In contrast, they had some physical evidence linking Timothy to the crime, but with Sean, they had nothing at all. When he came back from the restroom, they continued to question him, doubting his account of what happened. They suggested that they didn't believe he had simply stayed in the car and even implied that Timothy might have forced him into Kathy's house under threat. This tactic worked, and after some hesitation, Sean finally confessed that he had gone into the house by himself. He said he entered with the intention of stealing valuables, while Timothy waited outside. He mentioned that he slipped in through the unlocked back door and started searching the rooms for items to take. In Kathy's bedroom, he spotted the jewelry box while Kathy was still asleep in bed. Sean initially maintained that he had carefully taken the valuables and left without harming Kathy. He even suggested that Timothy might have returned to the house after the robbery and killed Kathy for unknown reasons. However, the detectives didn't believe him. They discovered blood on the jewelry box, indicating that the killer had taken the valuables only after the murder, which completely contradicted Sean's story. They continued to question him, dismantling his lies one by one, until he finally confessed. Sean admitted to killing Kathy. He claimed that when he entered her bedroom, she woke up and lunged at him. In a panic, He grabbed a knife and stabbed her multiple times. After she was dead, he took the jewelry, hurried out of the house, and got back into his car. Detectives were skeptical of Shawn's story. They found it difficult to believe that Kathy had suddenly lunged at him, trying to grab his knife. However, his confession was sufficient to arrest him. To build their case, they collected his shoes and had forensic experts analyze the soles, which matched the bloody footprint found in Kathy's bedroom perfectly. Despite this evidence, there was a significant issue regarding the murder of the elderly couple. When detectives asked Shawn about it, his attitude changed completely. He requested a lawyer and refused to answer any more questions. With no direct evidence linking him to that murder, the investigators faced a dead end. They returned to Timothy, who had been arrested as an accomplice in Kathy's murder. Under Texas law, this meant he faced the same charges as Shawn, even though he did not physically take part in the killing. Timothy acknowledged that he drove Shawn to Kathy's house, but insisted he never got out of the car and had no idea Shawn intended to kill her. However, he admitted to selling Kathy's stolen jewelry, which linked him directly to the crime. When detectives questioned him about the murder of Shelton's, he confessed that he and Shawn had gone there to rob the house as well. Again, he maintained that he stayed in the car while Shawn entered the house. Investigators looked into the possibility that Timothy was being honest. The thermal camera footage from Kathy's murder clearly showed only one person leaving the vehicle. If the same situation occurred in the second crime, it suggested that Shawn had acted alone again. Ultimately, Timothy was charged with all three murders because of his involvement, despite not having directly committed the killings. Meanwhile, Shawn faced official charges for Kathy's murder, but detectives had not yet been able to prove his connection to the second case. The court decided that Timothy and Shawn would have separate trials. During Timothy's trial, he claimed he was not involved in the murders and was unaware that Shawn intended to kill anyone. However, this did not alter the reality that he had driven Shawn to both crime scenes and had benefited from selling stolen jewelry belonging to Kathy. Ultimately, in November 2018, the jury found Timothy Parlin guilty, resulting in a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. Shawn's trial was considerably more complex. Unlike Timothy, who was connected to Kathy's case through physical evidence, Shawn's case relied mainly on his confession, a shoe print discovered in Kathy's bedroom, and footage from thermal cameras. His lawyer quickly challenged the evidence, arguing that detectives had forced Shawn to confess and pressured him to accept responsibility for a crime he didn't commit. The lawyer also maintained that the other evidence was merely circumstantial. Consequently, the jury was unable to agree on a verdict, leading the judge to declare a mistrial. Prosecutors continued their efforts, and a few months later, Shawn faced a second trial. This time, the jury was persuaded of his guilt, and he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole for Kathy's murder. Although there were strong suspicions regarding the murders of Billy and Sidney Shelton, he was never officially charged with those crimes. Investigators remained convinced of his involvement, but they lacked sufficient evidence to file charges. In the end, both men faced justice, but many questions remained unanswered. Detectives could not figure out why Shawn had killed his victims. If Kathy had truly woken up while he was in her bedroom, he could have easily escaped since it was completely dark, and she wouldn't have been able to identify him. It was clear that a simple burglary had turned into a brutal murder. Detectives struggled to understand the motive behind Billy and Sidney Shelton's deaths. They speculated that Shawn might have had some interaction with them at church, possibly leading to a conflict that sparked his resentment, similar to what occurred with Kathy. However, this was just guesswork. In Shawn's case, investigators could not dismiss the idea that he may have had no motive and simply wanted to kill. If that was true, it was likely he would have continued his spree if he hadn't been apprehended.
Oregon City is a small town located approximately 30 kilometers from Portland, Oregon, in the United States. It is generally a peaceful place, but some areas face issues with disorder and high crime rates. The town has a population of about 30,000 residents, including families like the Ponds and the Gattises. In 2002, the town's reputation was severely harmed by a series of shocking incidents. On the morning of January 9, 2002, 12-year-old Ashley Pond was getting ready for school. She had breakfast with her younger siblings and left her home at 8 a.m., heading for the school bus stop, an 8-minute walk from her apartment complex. She lived with her family in a low-income neighborhood, known for its industrial areas and frequent police presence due to domestic conflicts, burglaries, and other crimes. Ashley was a vibrant and talented girl who loved dancing and had plans to attend dance lessons after school that day. Her mother thought she would be home late because she had to attend dance class. However, by 6 p.m., Ashley still had not come home, which caused her mother to worry. First, she called the dance studio and found out that Ashley had not shown up for class. Growing increasingly alarmed, she began contacting Ashley's school and her friends. No one had seen her all day. Her friends mentioned that she hadn't even made it to school. This was unusual, as Ashley was a responsible and obedient student with no history of skipping school or running away. After exhausting all other options, her mother contacted the police to report that she was missing, providing a detailed description of her daughter. She was convinced Ashley hadn't run away and feared she had been abducted. However, detectives were initially skeptical. Ashley's mother had a troubled past. She struggled with alcoholism, had given birth to Ashley when she was only 16, and had several other children she often found difficult to care for. Some people viewed her as a bad mother, which may have influenced the initial reaction to Ashley's disappearance. Investigators initially assumed Ashley might have run away from her troubled home. However, many people who know Ashley do not believe that she would do that. At 12 years old, she is too young to make such a bold decision. Despite this, detectives did not treat the case as urgent. It was only after a week had passed that they began to suspect something serious had happened to Ashley. At that point, they started working on the theory that she had been kidnapped. Police reached out to her classmates, and, confirming their worst fears, they learned that she had neither been at school nor made it to the bus stop on the day she vanished. Over the following days, police searched the area around her apartment complex, utilizing trained dogs. Neighbors were questioned to gather any clues about her disappearance. Search teams, including community volunteers, were assembled, and detectives reviewed a list of approximately 90 local individuals with histories of abuse offenses. They also investigated suspicious residents known to have mental health issues and closely examined Ashley's online activity. Despite these efforts, no significant leads were uncovered. Complicating the matter is the fact that locals began reporting sightings of Ashley after she went missing. These claims were thoroughly investigated and dismissed as false. After a week of fruitless searching, authorities recognized the need for outside expertise. On January 18, 2002, 9 days after Ashley went missing, the police sought assistance from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. By this stage, investigators feared Ashley might not be found alive. The FBI immediately recognized the complexity of the case. There was no physical evidence, no witnesses, and no clear suspects. Ashley had seemingly vanished without a trace. A dedicated task force was formed to expand the scope of the investigation beyond the local area. Thousands of flyers featuring Ashley's photo were distributed, while law enforcement continued interviewing teachers, neighbors, and relatives to gather any potentially useful information. These efforts successfully raised public awareness, generating new tips from the community. Unfortunately, many of these tips ultimately led investigators down several dead ends. During the investigation into Ashley's relatives, detectives uncovered a disturbing incident involving her biological father. A year before her disappearance, her father had been charged with abusing her. For 3 years prior to the charges, he had been abusing her. Initially, Ashley did not even know her biological father, as she believed her stepfather, who lived with her mother, was her real dad. However, after her mother ended her relationship with the stepfather, she discovered the truth and decided to meet her biological father. Upon reconnecting with him, he took advantage of the situation and began abusing her. She visited him on weekends, but each time she returned home, she was visibly distressed. After enduring these visits for 3 years, she finally refused to meet him. Eventually, she confided in her mother, revealing what had been happening. Her mother immediately reported the abuse to the police. The case never went to trial because her father accepted a plea deal, which resulted in 10 years of probation. Investigators also considered him a suspect in Ashley's disappearance, but he was later ruled out after providing a solid alibi. Since April 2001, police have been called to Ashley's home several times for domestic conflicts and disputes. As the problems in her household escalated, she began spending more time at a neighboring house. Her classmate, 13-year-old Miranda Gaddis, lived there with her family. The two girls became close friends, attending the same school and frequently sleeping over at each other's homes. In August 1997, a man named Ward Weaver moved into a rented house on South Beaver Creek Street in Oregon City. His 12-year-old daughter, Mallory, became friends with Ashley and Miranda. All three girls were students at Gardner Middle School and attended the same dance class. Mallory's father, Ward, often drove them to school in the mornings. He is a 39-year-old man with a criminal record. He had previously served 3 years in prison for assaulting a nanny's child with a piece of concrete, and both of his ex-wives had accused him of domestic violence. At one point, one of Ashley's teachers noticed an alarming interaction. Ward kissed Ashley on the lips after giving her a ride. Concerned, the teacher reported the incident to the school principal. However, the matter was dismissed after the explanation that Ward likely viewed Ashley as a daughter and that the gesture was innocent. Over the summer of 2001, Ashley began spending even more time at Ward's house, sometimes staying there for extended periods. She even joined the Ward family on a 2-week trip to California. Upon returning from the trip, she confided to friends and teachers that Ward had harassed her. However, he denied the accusations, claiming that Ashley was lying and trying to defame him. He stated that he no longer wanted her in his home. Despite her allegations, no charges were filed against Ward. During the investigation, witnesses reported multiple instances of Ward behaving inappropriately toward Ashley. His daughter, Mallory, said there were times when he wouldn't let Ashley leave the house even if she wanted to. Despite these reports, authorities claimed there wasn't enough evidence to take action against him. Although Child Services received reports about the situation, Ashley refused to follow through with the complaints, making further legal action nearly impossible. After Ashley was eventually prohibited from visiting Ward's house, her emotional well-being, behavior, and school performance improved significantly. However, a few months later, she began visiting Ward's house again to spend time with her friend Mallory. By late December 2001, Ward's wife, frustrated with the circumstances, decided to leave their home. Less than 2 weeks after her departure, Ashley disappeared unexpectedly. Her sudden disappearance immediately raised suspicions. Ashley's close friend and classmate, Miranda, was a lively and outgoing girl who had spent most of her life in Oregon City with her family. From a young age, Miranda was considered attractive and dreamed of becoming a model. However, like Ashley, she faced significant challenges growing up. She had been abused as a child. Her biological father, although he never directly harmed her, had a criminal history involving the abuse of minors. Following their divorce, Miranda's mother entered a relationship with a new partner who faced numerous difficulties, such as coming from a marginalized background, having only a 9th grade education, and being illiterate. Tragically, this man was accused of abusing Miranda and 2 other girls. She bravely reported the abuse to authorities, leading to legal action in 1999. When Ashley went missing, Miranda became a key source of information. She showed immense courage by informing the police about the suspected abuse Ashley had endured, although her account was insufficient to clarify what had happened to her friend. Miranda and Ashley often confided in each other, sharing personal stories about their experiences with the Ward household and Miranda's biological father. Investigators suspected a connection between Ashley's disappearance and the allegations involving Ward. However, no solid evidence supported this theory. Meanwhile, rumors began to circulate that he had abused her. This led to the bullying and harassment of his daughter, Mallory, at school, deterring her from attending. Ward, angered by the accusations, denied the rumors. However, his ex-wife provided police with critical details, describing him as aggressive and difficult to handle. On March 8, 2002, 2 months after Ashley's disappearance, tragedy struck again when 13-year-old Miranda vanished. That morning, she said goodbye to her mother around 8 a.m. as her mother left for work. She planned to take the school bus, which arrived at 8:20 a.m., but she never made it to the bus stop. Her disappearance shocked the community. Just months earlier, Miranda had appeared on a TV broadcast discussing Ashley's case, pleading for her friend's safe return. Now, she had also disappeared. Family members clung to the hope that both girls were still alive and would come home safely. Miranda's case bore striking similarities to Ashley's. She was supposed to walk to the bus stop, but no one saw her on her way there, on the bus, or at school. By evening, her mother, panicked, contacted teachers, classmates, and the police. Detectives quickly noticed troubling parallels between the two cases. Both Ashley and Miranda were the same age, had similar physical features, and shared common interests, such as attending school dances. Miranda's mother insisted her daughter would never willingly talk to a stranger or run away. Known for being strong-willed, she was believed to have resisted an abduction unless the perpetrator was someone she knew. The disappearance of Miranda plunged the community into chaos. Residents demanded action, and the police were flooded with calls urging them to find the person responsible. Fear spread across the town as people began to feel unsafe, realizing a potential predator might be at large. In response, police formed a special task force and assigned 2 teams of investigators to the case. By March 15, officers were actively following leads. However, it was revealed that a significant number of potential suspects were initially overlooked. Many individuals who temporarily or semi-permanently lived in the apartment complex where Ashley and Miranda resided were unknown to the landlords. Investigators identified 150 such people, some of whom were registered criminals. Authorities also conducted more thorough checks on local offenders with histories of abuse, about 900 in total, analyzing their possible connections to the disappearances. As weeks passed, one name repeatedly surfaced: Ward. His wife claimed that Miranda had angered him by warning local girls to steer clear of him due to his behavior. She suggested this might have been a motive for him to harm her. What is suspicious is that he gave a television interview in which he dismissed the cases, claiming that Ashley and Miranda simply ran away. Despite his questionable behavior, investigators consistently ruled him out because no evidence or witnesses directly linked him to Ashley and Miranda's disappearances. The property surrounding Ward's house had already been inspected by a dog handler and a specially trained dog. Later, an independent investigator requested permission to conduct a further investigation. Permission was granted by the homeowner, but the owner specifically asked the investigator to avoid a concrete slab that had been poured in a distant section of the property. Importantly, when the dog trainer brought the dog near the area, the dog indicated that there might be a body buried nearby. This information was submitted to the city police department in a report. However, since the dog handler was independent, further verification was required. Upon reviewing records, detectives discovered that Ward's father had a history of violent crime. He had buried one of his victims under a concrete slab in his yard. Despite this revelation, detectives did not launch a large-scale search of the property. Months have passed since Ashley went missing and there are still no clues as to her whereabouts. Many began to fear that the mystery of the 2 missing friends, Ashley and Miranda, would never be solved. Throughout this period, Ward consistently refused to provide any information. Unexpectedly, on June 30th, Ward agreed to speak with the media. He stated that he had no knowledge of what had happened to Ashley and Miranda, but admitted that he had become the primary suspect. The FBI identified several reasons for this. First, Ashley had previously accused Ward of molesting her. Second, he failed a polygraph test. Additionally, during questioning, he revealed that his father was on death row in California for murdering a girl and her boyfriend. Ward also shared details about his troubled childhood, stating that his father abandoned him at the age of 4 and subjected him to severe abuse. When Ward grew up, he reportedly directed his anger toward his younger siblings. Detectives suspected that he might have followed in his father's criminal footsteps. His media interview led investigators to reevaluate the evidence, reinforcing suspicions of his involvement in both disappearances. This prompted public outrage, with many questioning why Ward had not yet been arrested. Despite the failed polygraph test, the motives, and various suspicious circumstances, detectives felt they lacked enough evidence to charge Ward. Others had also failed polygraph tests, and Ward had allowed police to search his property multiple times, appearing cooperative. These factors contributed to the lack of action against him. By midsummer of 2002, police investigators were still hard at work, examining over 1,200 men for potential links. However, the case ultimately reached a standstill. The FBI announced a $50,000 reward for any information that could aid their investigation. The city administration contributed $10,000, and the owners of the residential complex where Ashley and Miranda lived added another $5,000. Despite these efforts, the search did not progress. Agents repeatedly appeared on television, urging citizens to report suspicious activity and highlighting the possibility that the girls might still be alive. However, these appeals yielded no significant leads. The breakthrough occurred on August 15, 2002. Meanwhile, Ward, who had been planning to leave town since early summer, packed his belongings and asked his son's 19-year-old girlfriend to help him move. After she helped carry his bags into his new home, he attacked her. He dragged her into the shower, forcibly removed her clothing, and abused her. He then attempted to strangle her, but she managed to escape. Wrapped only in a curtain, she fled the house. Realizing his plan had failed, Ward quickly packed his belongings and fled in his car. Terrified and aware of what had happened, his son, Francis, immediately called the police. Authorities stopped Ward before he could leave the city. He was arrested and charged with first-degree abuse. Due to concerns that he might flee if released, bail was set at $1 million. A week after the arrest, a significant breakthrough occurred. Francis, Ward's 24-year-old son, went to the police station and revealed that his father had confided in him before fleeing. Ward admitted to having done bad things and expressed a desire to escape. Francis suspected this was related to Ashley and Miranda but wasn't entirely certain. Following Francis's statement, authorities determined they had sufficient evidence to obtain search warrants and conduct an extensive investigation of Ward's home and the surrounding property. On August 23, 2002, a judge authorized a search warrant for the Ward property. Police sealed off the area and began a meticulous search, which was expected to take several days. On Saturday, August 24, law enforcement discovered a cardboard box containing human remains in a shed behind the house. Due to the condition of the remains, it was unclear how long they had been there, and identification would take additional time. Meanwhile, approximately 40 FBI and state police agents continued to examine the property. During the search, investigators determined that special construction equipment was necessary to excavate a concrete slab that appeared to have been poured after Ashley's disappearance. The following day, beneath the slab, they uncovered a barrel containing another set of human remains. Upon hearing this development, Ward's ex-wife expressed her outrage. She asserted that she had been convinced from the beginning that Ward was responsible for Ashley's death. Months before Ward's arrest, she had contacted the FBI, urging them to investigate him more thoroughly. She expressed fury that the delay in taking action may have allowed another victim, Miranda, to be killed. Authorities now believe that both Ashley's and Miranda's remains had been discovered on Ward's property. Ward's ex-wife also pointed out suspicious circumstances surrounding the concrete slab. She explained that the slab had been poured hastily in the middle of the night, immediately after Ashley's disappearance, which seemed unusual. Ward had claimed he planned to install a jacuzzi on the slab, but the jacuzzi never materialized. He never offered an explanation for the urgency of the construction. Within days, the remains that were found were identified as those of Miranda, Ashley's missing friend. The barrel contained Ashley's body. The hopes of their loved ones for their safe return were shattered instantly. Charges, including murder with aggravating circumstances, abuse, and second-degree abuse of a corpse, were filed against Ward in the weeks that followed. These charges were added to an existing case related to the abuse of his son's girlfriend. It also came to light that Ward might be linked to another abuse case dating back to July 2002. Prosecutors argued that the death penalty was warranted in this case. After analyzing the remains, investigators determined that both Ashley and Miranda had endured brutal violence, though the exact cause of death could not be established. Beatings, gunshot wounds, stabbing, poisoning, and strangulation were all ruled out. Ashley's body, mummified and frozen in a fetal-like position, was found fully clothed. A white rope had been tied in a specific manner around her arms, legs, and neck, resembling the position in which Miranda's body was discovered. Both bodies were wrapped in multiple layers of plastic and tightly bound. Investigators speculated that Ashley and Miranda had been kept in a freezer at the house for an extended period. Ward's fingerprints were found on the materials used to conceal their bodies. A toxicology report revealed that Ashley had a high level of alcohol in her system, equivalent to consuming 5 servings of whiskey or similar liquor shortly before her death. Miranda's body contained a lower concentration of alcohol. However, the exact amounts consumed remained unclear, as decomposition naturally produces alcohol over time. Ashley might have lost consciousness due to drinking, and it was believed that Ward had forced her to consume alcohol. It was later revealed that, just before Ashley's disappearance, Ward had attempted to get both Mallory's daughter and her friends Ashley and Miranda drunk. While the exact cause of Ashley's death could not be determined, the task force had to examine several possibilities to present in court. These included alcohol poisoning, suffocation, using a pillow, hand, or a technique that cut off blood flow to the brain, asphyxiation, confinement in a sealed container, or the use of rare illegal substances or poisons that were difficult to detect in toxicology tests. Following Ward's arrest, he continued to speak to reporters, proclaiming his innocence. He presented autopsy reports to support his claims, arguing that since prosecutors could not identify the exact cause of Ashley's and Miranda's deaths, they would not be able to prove his guilt. He also suggested that someone else might have buried the bodies on his property to frame him. However, the prosecution had substantial evidence against him, including accusations of abuse, Ashley's previous statement about harassment, testimony from other victims, and circumstantial evidence. Key pieces of evidence included Ward's fingerprints on the ropes and bags used to bind the bodies. Furthermore, prosecutors pointed out that Ward's father had been on death row for committing a similar crime. When the judge became aware of Ward's interactions with the media, a gag order was issued to ensure a fair trial. Despite this, Ward contacted a reporter, claiming that the judge could not stop him from exercising his free speech, a statement some interpreted as defiance. On April 22, 2004, shortly before the trial, Ward's lawyer submitted evidence suggesting that he had been mentally unstable at the time of his arrest. Ward had carved his daughter's name into his arm, inflicted injuries on his chest, and repeatedly banged his head during altercations. He maintained that he was being imprisoned simply for disciplining his daughter. A defense psychiatrist diagnosed him with severe depression and narcissistic personality disorder. However, the prosecution's psychiatrist argued that Ward was exaggerating his symptoms. Ward's erratic behavior in jail eventually led to his placement in solitary confinement. He was prescribed high doses of antidepressants and, due to his mental state, was transferred to a psychiatric hospital. The trial was temporarily suspended while professionals evaluated whether Ward was feigning his symptoms. By late summer of 2004, psychiatrists deemed him mentally competent to stand trial for murder and other charges. Fearing a death penalty conviction, Ward's lawyer negotiated a plea bargain with the prosecution, a choice supported by Ashley's and Miranda's families. On September 22, Ward pleaded guilty to 7 of the 17 charges against him, including murder with aggravating circumstances, abuse, and abuse of a body. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. As part of the plea agreement, the death penalty was dropped. After the sentencing, Ward's son Francie expressed relief, stating that he was grateful his father would never harm anyone or destroy lives again. However, Ward refused to disclose where and how Ashley and Miranda had died, leaving their families desperate for answers. In 2009, Miranda's younger sister visited Ward in prison twice in hopes of obtaining the truth. She believed this was the only way to find closure and peace. During the second visit, Ward admitted to killing both girls, describing how he had strangled them with his bare hands and buried their bodies on his property. Disturbingly, he boasted about successfully hiding their remains to avoid detection by authorities. Shockingly, he told Miranda's sister that if she had been older at the time, he would have likely killed her too. Ward was incarcerated at the East Oregon Correctional Facility, along with 4 other inmates. This section of the prison is specifically designated for individuals convicted of severe crimes, with inmates kept isolated from one another for safety reasons. Despite these precautions, the measures proved insufficient. On March 4, 2007, an inmate working as a barber attacked Ward. Inmate barbers in correctional facilities are required to use electric razors for safety, but he wielded a homemade razor and stabbed Ward in the neck. Security intervened, apprehending him and saving Ward's life. The exact motive for the attack remains unclear, though it is believed to be connected to Ward's criminal history. On February 14, 2014, Ward's son, Francis Weaver, who was 31 years old at the time, was arrested and later convicted of murdering prohibited substance dealers in Canby, Oregon. He was sentenced to life in prison. This crime marked yet another act of violence linked to the Weaver family, making it the third consecutive generation of men in the family associated with murder. In 2019, following an executive order from California's governor imposing a moratorium on the death penalty, Ward had his death sentence commuted to life imprisonment and was transferred to the general prison population. In 1998, Shil Danishevsky-Kovlin, 34, lived in New York and worked in the financial consulting field. She is known for her kind and charming personality, which makes it easy for people to notice her. Extremely ambitious, she immediately entered the financial field in New York after graduating from college with a degree in marketing. Through dedication and hard work, Shil quickly became a respected financial advisor, serving many prestigious clients. Her colleagues admired her efficiency and determination. However, while her career was advancing rapidly, Shil's personal life was not as smooth. By her late 30s, she was still single, and she longed to focus on her personal life, hoping to find a partner who shared her values and ambitions. In February 1998, Shil attended a Jewish singles event at a bar called La Barbat in Manhattan's Hell's Kitchen. She saw the gathering as a perfect opportunity to meet someone who shared her faith. At the event, she met 25-year-old Rod Kovlin. For Shil, it was love at first sight. So convinced of their connection, she called her sister Eve just hours later, saying she planned to fly to Las Vegas to marry him that night. Eve managed to talk Shil out of making the impulsive decision, but the bond between her and Rod remained strong. Despite their 11-year age gap, they found themselves to be compatible. A few weeks later, they got engaged, and by September 1998, just 7 months after meeting, they were married in a joyful ceremony surrounded by family and friends. In 2000, 2 years after their wedding, Shil and Rod welcomed their first child, a daughter named Anna. The early years of their marriage appeared promising, with their bond growing stronger and them becoming inseparable. They were both deeply connected to their Jewish faith and participated actively in their local Orthodox Jewish community. For a time, everything seemed to be going well. However, over the years, differences began to emerge. They gradually realized that they did not have as much in common as they had initially believed when they got married in 1998. Shil was a hardworking and motivated individual who achieved great success in her career, eventually becoming the Senior Vice President of Private Wealth Management at UBS. Meanwhile, Rod has had many difficulties and has not achieved any success in his career. He initially tried a career as a stockbroker but failed to establish himself, leaving him reliant on Shil's income. Hoping to help Rod find success, Shil financed several of his business ventures. However, he lacked the drive to make them work, and each attempt ended in failure. While Shil found his lack of ambition frustrating, she continued to love and support him. Over time, more problems surfaced. Rod became obsessively interested in backgammon and gambling. After a few initial wins, he decided to pursue backgammon as a way to make money. He began traveling across the country for tournaments, sometimes staying away for days at a time, and spent countless hours practicing when he was home. Unfortunately, his obsession with backgammon wasn't his only troubling behavior. Rod also began seeking attention from other women, using websites and social media to contact them. At his most obsessive, he reportedly reached out to almost 40 women on Facebook in a single day, many of whom he had met at backgammon tournaments. His preoccupation with backgammon and other women took precedence over his responsibilities as a husband and father. To make matters worse, he started displaying sudden and extreme outbursts of anger, leading Shil to suspect that he might be bipolar. Shil experienced even greater heartbreak when she became pregnant with twins but tragically lost both babies during a premature delivery. One child died in the womb, while the other passed away shortly after birth. Despite this devastating news, she and Rod still desired another child. In 2006, they turned to an egg donor, and Shil gave birth to a baby boy named Miles. Over time, Rod's behavior became increasingly toxic and manipulative. He weaponized the egg donor process against Shil, cruelly reminding her of her inability to conceive naturally and blaming her for using an egg donor. He even goes so far as to tell their son, Miles, that Sheil is not his biological mother. By 2008, 10 years into their marriage, Sheil and Rod's relationship had completely unraveled. Rod's behavior continued to deteriorate. He suggested the possibility of an open marriage, a concept entirely incompatible with Sheil's values as an Orthodox Jew. She firmly rejected the idea, but he refused to change. He even used the alias James Early to join JDate, a Jewish dating site, openly flaunting his infidelity without any regard for his wife's feelings. By January 2009, Sheil was emotionally drained and overwhelmed by Rod's toxic behavior and uncontrollable anger. Fearing for her safety and that of her children, Sheil confided in her sister, Eve, expressing concern that Rod's actions could cause harm. In April 2009, she decided it was necessary to separate from him to shield her children from the ongoing conflict. She rented an apartment across the hall in the same building and asked Rod to move there, so he could stay close to the children while minimizing exposure to further tension. Initially, the arrangement seemed to work, but after only a month, Rod broke the agreement and moved his belongings back into Sheil's apartment, further exacerbating the situation. By mid-May 2009, Sheil realized her marriage was beyond repair and decided to file for divorce. Rod moved back into the apartment across the hall. Gradually, Sheil's life began stabilizing. She fully dedicated herself to her flourishing career and, freed from her broken relationship, began dating again. Both personally and professionally, she began thriving once more. However, Rod cannot accept Sheil's success and begins to sabotage her life. He installed surveillance cameras in the building's hallways and secretly placed spyware on her computer to monitor her activities. He even tried to falsely accuse her of using banned substances to make her lose her job and said she had drained all the money in their joint bank account. In reality, Sheil had withdrawn only $800, while Rod had taken $7,200 since their separation. Rod's accusations failed, as Sheil's boss knew the truth. Frustrated by his failed attempts, Rod grew even angrier. On July 8, 2009, he abused his unrestricted access to Sheil's apartment and took their children without her permission. When he failed to return them by 8 p.m., as agreed, Sheil made repeated attempts to contact him, but he ignored all her calls and messages. Fearing for her children's safety, Sheil contacted the police. Contrary to what Rod had told Sheil, he had neither taken the children sightseeing nor to a theme park. Instead, he took them to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital and falsely accused Sheil of abusing them. However, doctors and agents from the Administration for Children's Services, ACS, quickly saw through his lies. The children were returned to Sheil around 5:30 a.m. the following morning. Despite being exposed, Rod continued his fabricated claims. He reported Sheil to the NYPD's Special Victims Unit, but detectives, like the doctors and ACS agents, determined he was lying and dismissed the case. This strategy ultimately backfired on Rod. The family court judge overseeing their divorce case restricted his visitation rights, allowing him to see the children only under court-supervised conditions. Additionally, the court ordered him to pay Sheil $425 per month in child support. When Rod claimed he couldn't afford the payments, the court prohibited him from spending money on gambling and backgammon, which further fueled his anger. Rod's anger escalated into physical violence, including choking Sheil and threatening to kill her. Fearing for her life and the safety of her children, Sheil obtained a court-issued protection order. At that time, he was still a beneficiary in her will. However, on December 29, 2009, she decided to completely remove him from her will and contacted her estate attorney to finalize the changes. On December 30, 2009, Sheil hired a babysitter for her children and went on a date with someone she had recently connected with on JDate. After returning home, she spent time with her children, put them to bed, and logged into her JDate profile at 10:13 p.m., logging out a few minutes later. The next morning, on December 31, 2009, Sheil's 9-year-old daughter, Anna, woke up at 7 a.m. and went to wake her mother. When she didn't find Sheil in her bed, she checked the bathroom. Upon opening the door, she screamed, Sheil was lying face down in a pool of blood. Anna immediately called her father, Rod, who arrived at the apartment shortly after. He moved Sheil's body from the bathtub, called 911, and performed CPR on her unresponsive body. When police arrived at the scene, first responders informed them that Sheil's body had been found in the rear bathroom of the apartment. Investigators soon arrived as well. Rod claimed that Sheil must have slipped while taking an early morning shower and hit her head on the bathtub. He pointed to a cabinet above the tub with partially broken hinges as evidence of an accidental fall. Initially, investigators believed it was a tragic accident. They briefly questioned both Anna and Rod before concluding their investigation and informing Sheil's family of her death. After returning to his office, Detective Rothermel reviewed the details of the crime scene. Although the initial evidence pointed to Sheil's death being an accident, he suspected something was amiss. Several observations from that morning did not align with Rod's explanation of a slip-and-fall incident. For instance, the position of Sheil's body and the angle of the detached cabinet door didn't match the narrative. Additionally, Sheil had visible bruises and scratches on her face, lips, and right arm, which seemed unusual for someone who had simply gone to the bathroom for a shower. To investigate further, Rothermel delved into Sheil's activities from the prior evening, uncovering a key detail that raised questions. The day before her death, Sheil had undergone a keratin hair treatment and was instructed not to wash her hair for 72 hours. This prompted Detective Rothermel to question why Sheil would take a bath when she wasn't supposed to wet her hair. Another inconsistency was Rod's claim that he had pulled Sheil's body out of blood-stained water, yet his shirt appeared to be completely clean when he recounted this to the police. Despite these observations, Rothermel chose to wait for Sheil's autopsy results before proceeding with a full forensic investigation of the crime scene. However, an autopsy was not performed because Sheil's family objected on religious grounds. Without further evidence, Rothermel's investigation stalled, and the case was eventually closed. News of Sheil's death shocked everyone close to her. However, like Detective Rothermel, many of her family members and friends have questioned the circumstances surrounding the incident. Sheil's sister, Eve, shared that Sheil doesn't like to soak in the bathtub and always prefers to take showers. Her friend, Stephanie Goldman, confirmed this and said that she never even took a quick shower. Even after Sheil's burial, her family strongly suspected that her ex-husband, Rod, was responsible for her death. These suspicions grew stronger when Sheil's estate attorney, Lance Meyer, disclosed a crucial detail. On the day of her death, she had been scheduled to meet with him to remove Rod from her will. This revelation pointed to a clear motive. Rod stood to inherit $5.2 million if Sheil died while his name remained in the will. Armed with this crucial information, Sheil's family urged authorities to reopen the case and resume the investigation. Detectives Rothermel and Francis Brennan, the lead investigators in the case, informed the family that the investigation could not proceed further as the case was officially closed. They explained that the only way to reopen it would be to allow an autopsy to be conducted on Sheil's body. However, due to the family's religious beliefs, this was initially not an option. After being denied assistance by the police, the family decided to hire private investigator Michael Swain to uncover the truth about Sheil's death and Rod's involvement. When Michael visited Sheil's apartment, he noticed some peculiar details. The cabinet hinges in the bathroom appeared to have been deliberately loosened, something Sheil, who had a slim build, would not have been able to do, even during a fall. Additionally, there was no bath towel in the bathroom, which was a strange detail considering Rod's claim that Sheil had gone there to take a bath. 2 months after Sheil's death, her family ultimately consented to an autopsy. On March 1, 2010, the authorities obtained a court order for the procedure, and Sheil's body was exhumed for examination. The autopsy revealed that her hyoid bone was fractured, a common indication of strangulation. As a result, in April 2010, Sheil's cause of death was officially reclassified from an accident to a homicide. However, investigators had to wait 2 more months to secure a search warrant for her apartment. Investigators began questioning individuals who had interacted with Sheil in her final hours. One of her friends, Melissa Shields, was the first to be interviewed. Melissa recalled meeting Shields shortly before her death and sensing that something was troubling her. When Melissa asked about it, Shields admitted that she felt her ex-husband, Rod, was following her. When it came time to question Rod, he refused to cooperate. The investigators later examined his emails and phone records from December 30, 2009. They discovered that he had been in contact with Deborah Oles, a married woman from North Carolina who had 3 children and was a Parcheesi player. They had begun an extramarital affair, and she had even traveled to New York to visit him. On the night of Shields' death, Rod played online backgammon with Deborah until 1:03 a.m. At that point, he told her he needed to work on tasks for the Backgammon Federation. However, at 4 a.m., Rod texted Deborah, claiming he had fallen asleep and hadn't completed the work. Surveillance footage showed Rod leaving his apartment building at 4:13 a.m. and returning moments later. Notably, he gave the doorman a Snickers bar, an unusual gesture for a normally unsociable person like him. Shields' estimated time of death was between 1:25 a.m. and 4:25 a.m., coinciding with the window of time Rod was not in contact with Deborah. Investigators interviewed Deborah, but she spoke highly of Rod and provided no evidence linking him to Shields' murder. Rod was unable to access the money Shields had left him in her will due to the murder case filed against him in 2011 and the ongoing investigation. His children were eventually placed in the custody of his parents following a custody battle. Later, Rod's parents discovered he had stolen $84,000 from his children's college fund, which he had spent on trips with Deborah and backgammon tournaments. As Rod's behavior became increasingly violent, his parents evicted him and Deborah from their home. Angered by this, Rod devised a plan to kill his parents in order to regain custody of his children and access Shields' money. He came up with multiple scenarios, including using his daughter, Anna, to poison their tea, but he ultimately abandoned that idea. Instead, he planned to sneak into the house through a basement window, murder his parents, retrieve his children, and burn down the house. Some of these plans involved Deborah, but she refused to participate and urged him to abandon his schemes. While Rod was plotting ways to avenge himself on his parents, the police were actively investigating Shields' murder and searching for solid evidence against him. As the investigation progressed, Rod became aware that he was close to being arrested. In a desperate attempt to avoid suspicion, he tried to frame his own daughter, Anna, for Shields' murder. He created a fake email, supposedly written by Anna, confessing to having pushed Shields in the bathroom during an argument, which allegedly led to her death. In the email, he claimed that on the night of Shields' death, Anna had fought with her mother over her mother's romantic relationships. By 2014, Rod's girlfriend, Deborah, had also begun to fear him, leading to the end of their relationship. After the breakup, Deborah contacted the authorities and disclosed everything she knew about Rod's plans. She also provided hard drives with incriminating data from Rod's devices, which implicated him in Shields' murder. Rod Coughlin was arrested on November 1, 2015, just 2 months before the expiration of a 6-year waiting period that would have granted him access to Shields' $5.2 million fortune. Based on Deborah's testimony and other evidence she provided, Rod was officially charged with second-degree murder in 2016. His trial began in 2019 at the Manhattan Supreme Court in New York. During the 8-week trial, a 12-member jury heard witness statements, including one from Patricia Swenson, a former girlfriend of Rod's. Patricia testified that during a trip in August 2009, Rod had expressed deep anger toward Shields and repeatedly stated that he wanted to kill her. Prosecutors argued that Rod had been planning Shields' murder for some time and that, although the evidence was circumstantial, it clearly identified him as the only person with a strong motive. As the trial continued, more evidence against Rod emerged. Despite his defense lawyer's attempts to portray him as innocent, the jury found Rod Coughlin guilty of murdering his ex-wife, Shields Danishevsky Coughlin, on April 10, 2019. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years, for second-degree murder. Rod later appealed the verdict, but his appeal was denied. He is currently serving his sentence at the Attica Correctional Facility in New York.